He's on.
Sure.
What do you want me to do?
Yeah, if you had it.
I have it,
And then he's gonna just do his own.
but that's the only one that's like gonna be on the.
What about the dog
The,
line?
the other, yeah, he'll be able to, so you'll just want to make it where they can share it, they can share it.
Street.
Yeah.
So which one is that?
president has recognized you, please clearly state your name and the name of the organization you represent prior to addressing the commission. All comments, questions, and responses must flow through the president by addressing the president each time you wish to speak. This procedure ensures an orderly flow of discussion during the commission meeting. All meetings of the governing body of the agency are public meetings open to the public, except as otherwise provided pursuant to Wyoming statute 164403A. This meeting is being held in person and is available on Zoom and able to watch via the live video streaming on the Wyoming Gaming Commission's YouTube channel. The commission may open an executive session pursuant to Wyoming statute 164405A. Inclusion on the agenda does not necessarily constitute a commission action.
Thank you, Director Claramendi. Now, if you would all join me, stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the agenda. Now it's time for discussion, consideration, and action of the agenda. So
Move to adopt the agenda.
we have a motion to adopt the agenda. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda. Is there any discussion? Discussion. Hearing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Now approval of the consent list items.
So do we have to do this in 2 points?
We do.
So we make a motion to have these items moved to the consent list first? Is that right? So I make a motion to move these items to the consent list.
So we have a motion on the floor to move these items. That would be item 9A, item 10C, and item 15A through I to the consent list. Is there a second?
President Cavello, for just a correction because the item numbers changed. So this would be item 10A, item 11C, and item 16A through I. Everything got moved one more
Okay,
line.
10A, 11D, 16A through I.
Correct.
Okay, I'll get off of my computer and onto this printed. Okay, very good. So that is the motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Is there any discussion? Is there anything on here that anyone would like to have removed so that we can do it individually? Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll proceed to vote on the consent list. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Motion carries.
I guess I'll make a motion to accept the consent list.
Approve the, Approve.
Yeah.
okay, we have a motion on the floor to approve the consent list. Do I hear a second?
I'll second. I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Perfect. Is there any discussion? Discussion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay? Motion carries. Moving right on, item 4.
President Cavello, item number 4 is a disciplinary matter. It's a settlement agreement between the Wyoming Gaming Commission and S&C Vending. And I will hand this over to Mr. Marvel to present the proposed settlement agreement.
You have to hold it. Supposedly.
Good morning, Mr. President, members of the commission. Ryan Marvel with the Wyoming Attorney General's Office, the prosecuting attorney for the commission. I am here this morning to discuss a combined settlement agreement and stipulation and order involving S&C Vending. As the commission members will notice, this is a combined docket 2025-0111 and docket number 2025-0035. Both of these incidents involve S&C vending. The first incident occurred on March 27th, 2025, during the course of an inspection, a skills operating game was found operating without the required decal and barcode. Subsequently to that, on the following day, it was discovered that this skills game had actually been placed into operation prior to the application being submitted, approved, and granted. And so based on that, during the course of the investigation and through prosecution, we determined that there was violations of Chapter 4, Section 3 of the decal placement rules and regulations, as well as Chapter 2, Section 3 of the decal application and fees rules and regulations. And then subsequent to that, there was a second incident. This incident was not at the same location. It was a different location where on August 6, 2025, during the inspection, it was determined that one of the skills game was actually missing from the location. During the course of the investigation, it was determined that the machine had started malfunctioning and was removed. However, the proper application had not been submitted to the commission for removal of that machine. And again, in relationship to that, that would be a violation, a determination of violation, Chapter 2, Section 3G, again, of the decal applications and fees. So premised on that, again, and with both of those incidents that I just described to you, notice was issued to S&C vending, and it was determined, or we determined, that in the course of this, that the appropriate penalty or discipline in this action would be the fine of $7,500 for both of these instances. And so that is what is being recommended to the commission here today, is an approval of this settlement agreement, which acknowledges these violations, but at the same time, essentially is a monetary fine, which will be paid by S&C vending. And so in accordance with that, I would because the commission does need to approve this settlement agreement, request approval of this settlement agreement. And I'm happy to answer any questions that the commission members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Marvel. Are there any questions from the commissioners?
Council, educate me on the process. So when you find a violation, do you issue a notice of violation to the permittee or licensee?
So, yeah, so the initial inspector will issue a notice of violation, but then from there, the prosecution side, then what happens is in line and consistent with the Wyoming Administrative Procedures Act. So at that point in time, once it comes across my desk, then a notice of complaint will be issued based on the violation, which gives them the opportunity for a contested case. And at that point, it also gives them the initial response time, which is 20 days. Once the response deadline is, then a notice of intent is issued, which also gives them another 20 days to respond, both under the commission rules as well as the Wyoming Administrative Procedures Act. And so again, that's their opportunity for a contested case. Once that proceeds, then if we still have not found lawful, if they haven't demonstrated lawful compliance with our rules, then we issue a petition of complaint. In this case, I think in both instances, the settlement agreement was reached at the time of the notice intent had been sent out.
In the notice of violation initially issued, or the notice that comes from your office, do you propose disciplinary action in either of those notices?
So the notice of complaint, no. So the way that I would generalize the notice of complaint, just in general, not even in front of this commission, but any board or commission in which I represent, the notice of complaint in most circumstances is basically, there are certain requirements that have to be contained in there. But essentially what the notice of complaint is we either have received this complaint or we initiated a complaint based on the facts. And the facts are usually stated as it would be in each of these cases. Hey, we went out, inspected. There was, in relationship to that, there wasn't the decal present. Provide us a response showing compliance, or provide us a response to show us, if we're misunderstanding of the facts of circumstances. In cases like this, that's usually very rare. And so the notice of complaint stage is really the opportunity for them to say, I think, you guys didn't get this correct or this was incorrect. And at that stage, no, from my perspective anyway, Commissioner, at that stage, that's their opportunity to discuss it and show us things. And there hasn't been any decision as whether or not disciplinary action is going to be initiated. Once we get to the notice of intent stage, that is the purpose, hence notice of intent. It's notifying them of our intent to seek disciplinary action in relationship to that.
And is it in that document, the notice of intent, where you set forth what you're going to seek in terms of discipline?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President.
Certainly. Does anyone else have any questions? Yes, Commissioner Riddell.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I understood you right, the machine had no right to have a stamp. Is that correct?
So in the first instance, so the first instance, when we're talking about the March 27th, it's a little bit, so let me explain it. There did come a point in time where they did submit the application, the proper application for the decal and
Okay.
everything else. But at the time of inspection, it didn't have the decal and it didn't have the barcode and it hadn't been applied for at that point in time. So they hadn't received it, if that makes sense, to place it on there. So subsequently, they did remedy that and everything was corrected in relationship to that. So yes.
And was this the only machine in captivity? Or was it in other locations? Or that's the only one they had?
So the first incident would have been at Mingles in Laramie. And
Mhm.
so there would have been other machines, but this was the only machine there without the decal and barcode. Does that make sense?
In that location?
Yes, in that location.
Anyone else with any questions for Mr. Marvel?
President Cavello, if I may, real quick, just to expand upon that to Commissioner Bull's point. So the way that internally that we do this, when we have agents in the field, if they go out and they see a violation, they do it's almost like a criminal summons. It's a little, 3-copy paper that they'll write to the operator or the vendor. They come back, they type a full report on it of their findings and the action and everything that took place. And then after we review those reports, then depending on the circumstances, then we'll submit that report to Mr. Marvel's office for him to review and start the whole disciplinary proceedings. In this instance, just so, we try very hard and we've tried very hard in the past to, do a lot of education and information. But at some point, the verbal warnings and the written warnings had to kind of come to a head and we had to start doing formal complaints on some of this.
Has there been a motion?
No.
Your Honor, I would make a motion that we accept the settlement agreement as explained by Attorney Marvel.
So we have a motion on the floor to accept. Do I hear a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Discussion. Hearing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the commission. Appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Marvel. We appreciate all your work and your explanations. Moving on, item 5.
President Cavello, item 5A is 2 applications for new vendors for online sports wagering. One is for Kiro Gaming, which is a software platform or software programming platform company, and Arrow Payments, which is a payment processing company. July 28th of 2025, the commission received the initial application for Kiro Gaming, Inc. When we initially received the application for Kiro Gaming, Inc., they were in the process of obtaining their certification from the Wyoming Secretary of State that hadn't gone through completely yet. So we placed their application on hold until that made it through completely. They made that through completely on August 22nd. So that's when we started the whole process with them. On September 22nd is when we received the application for Arrow Payments, Inc. Staff went through, did backgrounds on both companies and all of their listed executives. After the review, it appears that both companies and all their executives meet all the statutory requirements to hold an online sports wagering vendor permit in the state of Wyoming. That would stand for questions if you have any.
Are there any questions for Mr. Steenberg with regards to the applications for sports wagering? Can we approve these both at the same time, or do we need to approve them separately?
President Cavello, I would recommend separate.
Okay, so let's look at Kiro Gaming first. Are there any questions for Mr. Steenberg with regards to Kiro Gaming? How about a motion to approve?
Make a motion to approve Kiro Gaming.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Have a second? Is there any discussion? Any discussion from the commissioners? How about the public? Do we have any discussion from the public? Anything online? Any hands raised? Hearing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of the approval for online for Kiro Gaming, please designate your approval by aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. That motion carries. Now we'll consider Arrow Payments Incorporated, payment processor. Are there any further questions for Mr. Steenberg with regards to Arrow Payments Incorporated, the payment as a payment processor? How about a motion to approve them as a payment processor?
Commissioner Schiffer has his hand raised.
Commissioner Schiffer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't really understand, quite what this company is doing. And the concern I raise on this is how this company verifies all persons who have an interest in joint accounts and gets everyone's consent to either distribute money out of a certain account or put money in it. Is there something that covers people who may not be actually agreeing to have this company process their money? It's the best way I can describe it. Thank you.
President Cavello, Commissioner Schiffer, I don't know that I can specifically answer that. We may have to get an attorney, but Director Laramendi and I kind of talked about that when you raised that question before, and the best way I can kind of describe it is I don't know how it's any different than all other bank cards or credit cards or any other type of card that a husband and a wife have with a joint account. My wife and I have a bank card and credit cards with joint accounts, and when I use it and she's not there, they don't have express consent from her that I'm using it. It's just, I guess, implied. I don't know how to answer that legally, though. I don't know if Mr. Kaler can.
Mr. Kaler, can you enlighten us any further?
Mr. President, I'm not fully aware of exactly how they work and the details of everything. I can certainly look into it and get back to the commission, but I don't know that I have anything in addition to what Mr. Steinberg had to say.
If I may, Mr. Steenberg, as a payment processor, they are basically processing payments from online sports wagering back to the customer, is that correct? Or both directions?
I believe both directions. Yes, sir.
Okay, so they're basically a payment processor as would be a credit card processor for a vendor or a retailer.
That is correct.
And they're doing, and we already have several of these on the books.
Yes.
Okay. That's about as much as we know at this point.
Correct.
President Cavello, if I may, so it, in retail, it would be like merchant services is
Mhm.
exactly what it would be. So I mean, it would be they do the same job as whoever supplies the merchant services to your neighborhood gas station.
Commissioner Schiffer, does that help you any?
Mr. President, well, it really doesn't because as opposed to us being a bank, who approves a joint account, we're now brought into the group that, we're giving a blessing for somebody to send money and we don't have, and if they're going to try to hold the gaming commission or the state of Wyoming responsible for unauthorized payments, that involves us and lawsuits and expenses and all kinds of things. So, I mean, I don't think it's a good practice that we approve this kind of a transactions without knowing that we are in solid legal ground, which I'm not hearing from anybody out there. So I'm not really happy with this kind of arrangement. I don't know what other types of arrow type payment groups we've approved in the past, but if we have, I think we need to take a look at this kind of thing and see if we are on solid ground as opposed to opening ourselves to liability. So I think we need to take a hard look at this thing. Thank you.
President Cavello, I guess
Director Larramendi.
in my mind, the way that this was, we had kind of looked at this is, for example, a merchant services for a liquor store. Not like I'm not saying this because we're on here. If my wife was an alcoholic though, and she went to a liquor store and she spent all of our money on alcohol, I wouldn't have authorized that, but I couldn't hold the liquor store responsible for that because she's a signer on the account. She has equal rights to the money as I do. So in this instance, now I think a fraudulent transaction would be completely different. Euro Payments would deal with it like any other fraudulent transaction. They have fraudulent teams that deal with, fraudulent transactions for stolen cards and everything else. But when you start looking at joint accounts and joint holders of accounts, you don't have to have both individual signers' approval for those transactions. Both are approved to sign for whatever they choose to sign for. In this instance, if a husband blew all the money on sports betting, it would probably lead to some serious marital problems. But I don't see any instance where the commission would be liable for an authorized transaction that he's authorized to make.
Director Larramendi, if I may, my understanding is we're approving basically a merchant processor is basically what we're approving here. We're approving them to process the payments, digital payments back and forth. And basically, we're doing our due diligence to look into basically their credibility and so forth. But we're not taking any responsibility thereof for any of those payments. Is that correct?
President Cavello, that is correct. And it's important to remember that especially on our sports wagering side, these companies that are even eligible to apply in Wyoming, they're already licensed in the same or similar capacity in 3 other jurisdictions. So they're offering this exact same service for sports wagering in 3 other jurisdictions, a minimum of 3 other jurisdictions.
Have any other comments or questions from the commissioners? Do we have a motion?
Yeah.
Do we have a motion in a second?
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
No? Okay. So we are still in discussion. Is there anyone that cares to take anyone care to make a motion or any action on this? Or would you like to have more information?
Mr. President, I so approve these arrow payments.
Okay, so we have a motion.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second to approve Aero Payments, Incorporated as a payment processor. Is there any further discussion? Commissioner Bowe,
So what kind of application process do they go through to get our approval, get the commission's approval?
President Covello, Commissioner Bolt, they send in full application, our standard application. All their executives now send in the multi-jurisdictional personal application and fingerprints. We look at the corporation, we look at the other states that they're licensed in, which includes checking with those states to see if there's any negative information about them, if they've had any like
And you have a check.
negative marks on their permits or whatever. If there's anything that comes back negative on their individual corporate structure, people, things like that, tax history.
you have a follow-up or anything?
No, thank you, Mr. President.
Anyone else have any questions or any discussion?
Mr. President,
Commissioner Kura?
Mike, basically, this is the same process that DraftKings, FanDuel, and all the other payment and, betting outfits have to go through when they apply for operation in the state of Wyoming, correct?
President Covello, Commissioner Kura, correct. Yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Schiffer, we'll let you after Representative Davis. Go ahead. You don't have it? Oh, I thought you did. Okay. Commissioner Schiffer, the floor is yours.
Well, just thank you, Mr. President, but I was going to follow up. Do we have any idea of the financial viability of this company or these types of companies, so that if there are, say, fraudulent transactions that someone's making a claim on, that they're able to deal with that type of a liability? Thank you.
President Covello, Commissioner Schiffer, there's nothing that came up in the background that indicates that there was any negative history of financial instability. That's what I can tell you as far as that goes.
Do you have a follow-up at all, Commissioner Schiffer?
Well, I guess not. I mean, I still have concerns whether companies like this, are viable enough to meet contingencies. And if they're unable, I can see them looking at the Wyoming Gaming Commission to fill those gaps for claimants to do that. So, well, I guess we hope for the best. Thank you.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Kaler.
generally speaking, under Wyoming statute 9-24-103, it lays out the reasons that you can deny an applicant. And, as long as the commission follows the statutes and follows their regular approval process, then you're going to be fine as far as a liability standpoint. The state and the commission are covered under the Wyoming Governmental Claims Act. And so as long as you're following your own statutes and your rules and you're following that process, that generally speaking, you're immune from lawsuit.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Anything from anyone else? Now, Representative Davis.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was just curious, Nick, or Mike, how many of these agencies or applicants do we currently have approved to do business in Wyoming in this capacity?
President Covello, Commissioner Davis, I think we have currently, I'm trying to get you the right number. I want to say we have about 85 vendors. That's kind of across the board. Not all of them are payment processors, but I think we're at probably 20, 25 different payment processors, depending on, what payment you use, really.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any further discussion on the motion? All right, hearing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries for Aero Payments Incorporated. Thank you. All right, we're done with item 5. Moving on to item 6.
President Covello, item 6, we'll kind of finish out the day here with some educational and information presentations. The first one that we're going to take these a little bit out of order for schedules and everything else. We do have a couple folks in the room that are going to speak, but we have a couple online. So we're going to start with Dr. Shatley. She should be joining here on Zoom, and I'll let her introduce herself so I don't botch anything or mess anything up, and let her take it from here.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Dr. Jennifer Shatley. I'm here to discuss a little bit about the organization that I am the executive director, the Responsible Online Gaming Association. And I'm going to share a PowerPoint. I'm assuming you can see. No. Is there an ability to let me share my screen as a presenter?
We'll have the administrator give you that.
Okay.
He's working through it right now. We'll also ask that we make your screen the primary screen.
Got it.
Bingo. We got you. We can see you.
Perfect.
And
Great.
you are sharing.
Great. Wonderful. So first I want to thank you for inviting me to participate today. I am excited to share some information around the Responsible Online Gaming Association. Just a quick introduction to me, just to give you an idea, my background touches on operations from gaming itself, policy, technology, advocacy, research. So I kind of have a 360-degree view of responsible gaming. And that's really what's leading a lot of the initiatives that we're doing at the Responsible Online Gaming Association, or ROGA. So what is ROGA? ROGA is fairly new. We were created in March of 2024. So we're a little less than 2 years old, but we did understand that with the rapid growth of legalization, that there was an opportunity to really evolve responsible gaming, especially in the online space. My background is bricks and mortar casinos. So looking at how do we take advantage of the unique opportunities of the online space around responsible gaming, and to really work collaboratively across everyone within the RG ecosystem. So our members represent 90% of the online sports betting market by handle. Many of these operators are in your jurisdiction as well. And really our purpose is fostering that collaboration and being able to do things that individual operators cannot do individually. All of them have responsible gaming programs, but there are things that we can drive collectively to have more action around responsible gaming than just their individual programs. And also, one of the things that we really are driving, and I want to touch on this for just a few moments, is this distinction between responsible gaming and problem gambling. That's an incredibly important thing as we set out to put forth policy and initiatives around responsible gaming. It was really clarifying the differentiation of these two policies and issues. They are both very important, but they are very different. So when you look at responsible gaming and problem gambling policies, each of them have different objectives, different audiences, different approaches, and different outcome expectations. So it's not about problem gambling programs are not the same as responsible gaming programs. They are not, you don't want the same things. The target audiences are quite different. When you're talking about responsible gaming, the target audience is actually the entire player population. So you're looking at consumer protection efforts around all players, not just those that are identified as either having problems or those that are experiencing risk. And I think sometimes that conflation happens and confuses policies around what is it we're trying to achieve when we're talking about responsible gaming. And that conflation really does negatively affect the effectiveness of these responsible gaming programs. It confuses everyone, and it confuses employees of what exactly it is they're trying to do or they're expected to do. And it also confuses audiences. We recently did a study at Roga talking to players about setting limits. The vast majority, 75% or more, said yes, they set limits. And then we asked them if they use the tools on the site and what they think of these tools at the site. And 45% of them said that they think these tools are not relevant to them because these tools are for problem gamblers. So that, again, that confusion and conflation between RG and PG is incredibly important that we need to address. And I share this because as I share with you next, sort of the initiatives that we're pushing forth at Roga, it really sets the context around what it is we're trying to do and the audiences we're trying to reach. So again, when we're talking about responsible gaming, we're talking about prevention, we're talking about protection, we're talking about providing tools, resources, processes for all players in order to have these robust consumer protection at the sites. So I'm going to delve in now and just touch on some of the initiatives that we're working on at Roga, and I encourage you to ask questions during this if you have any. First of all, our work focuses on 5 main core pillars. We are very focused on having an evidence base for everything that we're doing. So we are looking at research. There's research in responsible gaming itself is a very young field, and it's definitely so in the online field. So we're looking to fill those gaps and really expand our knowledge. And we're using that evidence to create education and awareness programs for a variety of different audiences, to create best practices for our operators. We're also looking at building an independent data clearinghouse and an independent certification program. And I'll go into each of these here. So our certification program, we have partnered with the Responsible Gambling Council out of Ontario, and we are looking to really create robust standards for operators around responsible gaming and having an independent third party as that assurance that they meet these robust standards. And we're also looking to help operators understand where they're doing well in terms of responsible gaming, but also giving them areas where there's opportunities for improvement. And we're always looking at continuous improvement and continuous evaluation. So we are looking to launch this in the second quarter of 2026. We are building it now with RGC. And expect for those certifications to actually start happening in second quarter. The data clearinghouse, this is really where we are excited about. This is a technology product that will allow us to share information to have a much more holistic view of a player. So instead of a platform view or an operator view, we would have a much more holistic view of a player across all platforms. And the first iteration of this data clearinghouse is a shared self-exclusion list amongst all of our operators. This list would be shared amongst, again, all of our operators in every jurisdiction. So this would get us to a national self-exclusion list, much closer than any that exists today. We do understand that there are legislative and jurisdictional limitations around state lists. So assurances that we are not sharing the state list. This is a separate list that we would be sharing across all of our operators and across all jurisdictions. And really it's to better support players that are telling us that they need to take a break from gaming, that they are vulnerable for whatever reason, and to really help support them in those decisions so they can't simply go from one platform to another or drive across jurisdictional lines and immediately engage in gaming in another jurisdiction. We are also looking at research again and best practices development, and a lot of collaboration goes into that. We recently launched guidelines for VIP player program management. We understood that was an area of importance and concern. And so we put forth the evidence-based best practices that all operators should be operating to, and all of our members have agreed to change policies and to operate to those standards. We're also a founding member of the AI Research Hub with UNLV because we understand AI as sort of the hot topic in pretty much every business, and we want to understand how to ethically use it within responsible gaming, and how can we use it to encourage positive behaviors, or if there is identification of risk, how can we engage with players to try to change behavior to lessen and decrease that risk so problems do not develop. We've also formed an advisory committee of former regulators, of researchers and clinicians, again, around that idea of collaboration and around that, creating that evidence base to understand that the policies we are putting in place are having the effect that we want, and not having either no effect or negative unintended effects. So we're very, again, focused on evidence. And we're excited also that we recently announced a partnership with an organization called BetBlocker, and they provide software to allow people to block sites, gambling sites, including unregulated sites. So this will help expand the regulated market self-exclusion to also include unregulated sites. And this software is made available for free. And then finally, our last pillar that we're working under is education. In February, we launched a product called Know Your Play, and this was directed towards college-age students. The idea around this was to really give information and tools around responsible gaming concepts that are important for this audience. So things like impulsivity, around this idea that they can also control an outcome by knowing enough information or by studying enough. So to break through a lot of these myths and these misperceptions around gaming for this age group. It is fully digital. Again, we're meeting them where they are. They're always on their phones. So this is how we are delivering this content to them. And we've also included lived experience of problem gambling to really bring to life the issue of problem gambling for this population. And then also we've included a lot of information around financial literacy. This is something that I think is missing in most of today's education, and it's directly tied to responsible gaming, but to a lot of other things that this age group is facing, like credit cards or debt or loans for school. So understanding financial literacy for really overall well-being. So this really is comprehensive in terms of self-regulation, around understanding limits, and really decision-making and risk-taking. So even if someone does not engage in online gaming, all of this content is relevant to them. I will say we're seeing great reception to this. We've had over 80,000 users, and they've also spent over 11 minutes on the site. That's the average, which is an eternity for this age group, especially when you think about TikTok videos and how long that attention span is. So we're very happy with this, and we are looking at how do we better integrate this into university curriculum across the United States. So with that, I want to thank you again for inviting me to speak and open it up if you have any questions or any other further discussion around what ROGA is doing.
Anyone with any questions for Dr. Shatley?
How are we doing on time? Because I have a question about the use of AI and what you're doing with AI to recognize or try to identify problem gamblers. Is that the reason for using AI?
So the reason we're looking at research around AI is to understand exactly what it is we should be looking at to identify risk. And also, how do we make it more personalized? So changes in personal behavior. So we're not implementing anything. We haven't created anything. This is really to set that education base. There's a lot of different what are called markers of harm out there across the world, quite frankly, that look at different things. So we're trying to validate what are the things we should be looking at that are indicative of risk. And then how do we engage AI into that?
Yes, Representative Davis.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just have a question. Can or do or does the program you're developing, the responsible gaming, does that help with the treatment of the problem gambling, or does it educate? I understand it's educating them, but do you see any correlations where it does help with the treatment or the causes of problem gambling?
So we have responsible gaming programs and we also have problem gambling programs. So they are different. So it depends on what we're looking at. So if we're looking at responsible gaming, the idea behind that is we're trying to prevent the problem in the first place. So all of the tools, information, resources that we're doing is that prevention part of it. But then we also have things around problem gambling policy as well. So things like self-exclusion, things like the bet blocker. We're also working on some other initiatives around that specific issue. And then also within responsible gaming itself, there is this concept of identifying risk. So risky behavior, risky play, and then how do we engage with that player, in what way, and how do we try to motivate behavioral change in order, again, as a prevention mechanism to prevent problems from developing. So then we also, if problems develop and that individual is encountering problem gambling, how do we connect them to the right resources and to the right treatment or services that they need to help with that issue as well? So we're doing both, but they are separate and distinct.
Anyone else? Not seeing anyone else with any questions, Dr. Shatner, we certainly appreciate your presentation today and the opportunity to gain some new knowledge and insight into problem gambling. And we thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
President Cavello, the next speaker is going to be logging on in about 10 minutes.
Which is a perfect opportunity for us to have a break. We'll be back at 2:00. Come on, give me a break. Director Larramendi, I believe we're ready to go with our next presenter.
Thank you, President Cavello. Our next presenter is Dr. Bernhard. Again, I'll let him introduce himself and give you a little backstory on him and then take it from there.
Dr. Bernhardt, we cannot hear you. Not yet.
Do you have a TA available? Your IT guy. Maybe it's us.
We don't have him muted, do we? Okay.
1 minute. Oh. He's recon. I think he's probably on back in.
Log back in, give it a go.
President Cavello, looks like he's logging back in here.
Perfect.
It's too long. Take it off. Set you back.
Can you guys hear me now?
We got you now.
Yes.
All right. Had to change devices there. Thanks everybody for your patience. I'm Bo Bernhard. Thank you so much for the kind invitation. I have been a longtime director of the International Gaming Institute. It's the world's largest academic institute studying the global gaming industry. I've also served as a vice president of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas for the past almost 6 years as I've been pulled up into administration and leadership. I believe we have some slides. Are those going to be able to be shared there, Eric?
Did you email those to me? If you email them to me, I can get them shared for you.
Let me see. Yeah, thanks, Eric. Thanks, Nick. Let me see if I can send those to you real quickly. We'll tell you what, I can actually
We're there. We have them.
oh, you do have them. Okay.
Nope, that's the wrong one.
Fake.
Doggone it, sorry.
No worries. Thank you, Nick, for your patience with all this.
You got 2 days. Good.
This time tomorrow, we'll start tapping our fingers.
Certainly do it. A few slides that I had. There's just a handful of visuals. We just proceed again. It was just a handful of videos. Nothing I can't send afterwards for your perusal.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're okay.
Okay. So again, thank you so much for the opportunity. My name's Bo Bernhard, and in a variety of different roles, I feel like I've just been incredibly fortunate. I was a college athlete, and my life was changed because of that. I had a professor who was in the audience, in the stands, and saw that my hometown was Las Vegas, Nevada, and asked what it was like to grow up in the shadows of the gaming industry. Said I should write a paper on it. That paper turned into a doctoral dissertation. By the time I was 30, I had spoken on 6 continents, because every jurisdiction around the world pretty much has at least contemplated the legalization of gaming. And of course, that's evolved in a variety of different ways since. So having just gotten back from Thailand, having just been engaged with the state of Hawaii, which is thinking about the way in which it engages the gaming industry, and having led at UNLV a gaming team that's quite large and quite reputable. It's been quite a ride. I've been very lucky to kind of hang on to a boogie board, I think, as the wave has swept the world. So what I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit about gaming regulation and the vital, crucial importance of your role. This is not an industry without regulation. And while a lot of industries, we think of of regulation as being something that gets involved and kills the industry. If you have weak regulation, it can kill the industry. And so I would encourage all of you to continue days like this where your students, I can tell you that on any given day at the International Gaming Institute, we have jurisdictions. You might have folks from the Michigan Gaming Commission rubbing elbows with folks from Ghana, folks from Costa Rica, folks from Singapore, all of whom, when the door closes and we get to kind of be honest in our classrooms, say, thank goodness you're here. I got to tell you, I'm on this board of the Michigan Gaming Commission because I sat behind the governor in the second grade, and I've been friends with him ever since, but I don't know anything about gaming, and I really feel like this class is important to me. So the International Gaming Institute and its Center of Excellence, which is the International Center for Gaming Regulation, does this all over the world in new jurisdictions and longstanding jurisdictions like Nevada. But I'd love to open, as I often do, with a description of how gaming regulation came to be. When you look at the state of Nevada, which is really the place that has, at the very least, done the most gaming regulation. From the 1930s up through the 1950s, there was a very weak regulatory presence, or in a way that it's more popularly known, there was a very strong mafia presence. And if you've seen the movie Bugsy, that was actually a very historically inaccurate portrayal. The movie Casino portrays very well the end of the unregulated, mafia-driven era. And while it's fun to kind of glamorize those eras in Scorsese films, the reality is the mob did not have anywhere near the capacity, the potency, the strength of the current era. And one of the slides I had is just a photo, and I can send it to you. The same corners of the world in an unregulated market, in a mafia-driven market, and in a post-mafia market. So if you look at, for example, Flamingo and Las Vegas Boulevard, if you visited Las Vegas recently, you know that now you have, of course, not just Formula One right now, but you have, of course, the Bellagio fountains, you have the grandeur of Caesar's Palace, you have the Flamingo Hilton. When you look at the same corner during the mafia era, it was a tiny, slow corner. And while we glamorized the mafia, they were responsible for tiny little, frankly, crappy places like the old Flamingo. And the best thing that that industry ever did was introduce the Nevada Gaming Commission and the Nevada Gaming Control Board, our two regulatory bodies. That happened not, in an easy way. In the 1950s, the Kefauver Committee in Capitol Hill was such that Robert F. Kennedy and a number of his allies on Capitol Hill drove alongside Estes Kefauver a cleanup of the mafia in general, and it transformed this industry in particular, leading to the 1955 creation of the Nevada Gaming Control Board and the 1959 creation of the Nevada Gaming Commission. The commission is where the folks who are civilians, people who don't spend their every day thinking about this, live. The Nevada Gaming Control Board is the full-time entity. Only 10 years later, in 1969, the Corporate Gaming Act in Nevada was passed and allowed corporations to own casinos, Hilton most famously at the time. But soon after that, really the mob died its dying breaths. And what has happened since then is the moment that the mob left, if you look at that last famous scene in Casino when Joe Pesci dies, Joe Pesci played Tony the Ant Spilatro, whose son I actually taught at UNLV many years later. But his demise was really the demise of the mafia in Las Vegas. Not coincidentally, when you look at that period, and that was 1980, right? It was the early 80s, not the 70s, not the 60s, but the 80s. It is no coincidence that if you look at the data, that is when the gaming industry took off. when you look at revenues, when you look at inbound tourists, when you look at jobs, when you look at all of the important metrics that policymakers like you have to pay attention to, the gaming industry took off at the very moment it got regulated. Now, most industries we're used to thinking of differently. We're used to thinking of heavy government regulation being associated with depressed profits. In the gaming industry, the exact opposite happened. Because, of course, when this industry cleaned up, it was the best business decision it ever made. When strong regulation showed up, it was the best business decision that the industry ever made, because it was suddenly palatable to a much broader proportion of the populace. The mafia-driven era, again, we glamorize it, but when you look at Las Vegas in those days, the casinos were largely empty. They were almost exclusively male, so half of the population wasn't even eligible to gamble, basically. And there weren't other jurisdictions saying, come here to places like Singapore. Singapore is a place where it's illegal technically to chew gum. They're so clean because they don't want it on their sidewalks. For them to now have one of the globe's shining gaming jurisdictions in a way that grew their GDP by 3% a year and their tourist numbers by 11% a year is really quite remarkable. None of that happens during the mafia era. You find folks in Wyoming, don't invite this industry into your backyard during a mafia era. So the cleanup, the history of regulation is a history of a really strong gaming regulatory authority, really leading to the best business outcomes. So I'd imagine as regulators, you might have moments where those in the private sector say, hey, you really need to ease up, to go easy on us, to not have a strong voice. But as Nick and I have discussed, that can be the worst thing that you do as gaming industry regulators, right? In fact, a strong regulated industry is associated with a very strong industry, and vice versa. And if you look worldwide, as we do at the International Gaming Institute, that's true all over the planet. So today, the cleanup, what I would call sort of the great cleanup era, has led to the greatest era of profitability in the history of this industry. Now, how has that happened? Let's look at a couple of places worldwide. Again, I mentioned Singapore. Singapore is a place where they didn't allow you to do anything gambling related for the vast majority of its history. And it was interesting. We had the Singapore Tourism Board come to the UNLV International Gaming Institute at the dawn of their legalization era. So this was 2001, 2002. And their government officials said, look, Singapore is one of the greatest places in the world. Everybody loves, of course, their own backyard. And they said it's got the best food because we're super diverse, and the Indians came in with their spices, and the Chinese came in with their spices, and the Japanese came in with their food. And as a result, we got one of the great food places in the world. We're on the friggin' equator. And so it's gorgeous here, right? It's like the best flowers, the best flora and fauna you can find anywhere in the world. And then they kind of leaned forward. I'll never forget this moment at our conference table here at UNLV. And they said, but Singapore's a little bit boring. And in a world where we've got to compete in what we'll call the fun economy here in a couple of slides, that's a bad thing to be. So if you've ever seen the movie Crazy Rich Asians, that movie basically has as its star a place called Marina Bay Sands, which I would argue is the world's greatest gambling achievement to date. It is a place that not only paid off its $6 billion mortgage in about 3 years, imagine doing that. It also has become the tourist locale for all of Asia, the glamour spot for movies like Crazy Rich Asians. And that's what the modern gaming industry is. Now, Singapore's Casino Regulatory Authority, the CRA, is notoriously strict, is notoriously strong, is notoriously a strong regulatory authority. In fact, in a way that the industry often squeals about. Having said that, that dance between those regulators and that industry has been, I would argue, the most successful in the world. I mentioned that I just got back from Thailand. Thailand is a place that is already a beloved tourism location. They just have one problem. It's stagnated. People have stopped coming, or at least the growth has stopped in Thailand. And as you can imagine, in a place like Thailand that's heavily tourism dependent, this is nothing short of a crisis. So what do they look to? They look to this industry. They look to the possibility of legalizing and then strictly regulating casinos that would line both the rivers of Bangkok and the beaches of places like Phuket. And so one of the things that they are adamant about, and one of the things that they've realized is if they have a weak
and poorly regulated industry, then the big companies won't come. In other words, if they have a place that has a low regulatory barrier, a low cost entry, a low regulatory barrier, they won't attract the top companies that in fact want strict regulation. And so expressing interest now are the Las Vegas Sands, the Galaxy Entertainments, the Melco Resorts, the Winds, the MGMs, in a way that wouldn't be possible in the old regimes, especially in Southeast Asia, where they have poor regulatory regimes. So again, the lesson around the world is a strong regulatory authority attracts capital, attracts a more sustainable, attracts a long-term strength in a way that is actually surprising to economists, because economists, and at least those that are more sort of on the business side of economics research, are used to saying, look, you can over-regulate industries, and what you will do is kill those industries. And while that's certainly true in the gaming industry, if you were to say there is a 90% gaming tax, you would kill this industry. You can't over-regulate the gaming industry. Historically, a strongly regulated industry is a good industry. So let's take a look at the gaming industry today. Worldwide, it is a vastly more complex industry to regulate than it ever has been before. And as a result, you need classes like this to regulate it. You need classes like those that we provide at the International Gaming Institute to lead it on the business side as well. I just got back from 10 days in Lake Tahoe, where we run the International Gaming Institute's executive development program. So if you're somebody who wants to be a CEO of one of the tall, shiny buildings on the Las Vegas Strip, you likely go to the executive development program in Lake Tahoe that we run in order to get the certificate that sort of has become the passport to that role. And I would point out that now on the Las Vegas Strip, basically every major gaming business on the Strip is run by a UNLV grad. Whether you're talking about Wynn, which is a Fortune 500 company run by one of ours, Craig Billings is an alum, or across the street at the Resorts World, where Carlos Castro is running Resorts World, he's one of ours. His predecessor, Alex Dixon, one of ours, a UNLV soul as well. Just down the road, Glenn Carano, who, the Carano family is now famously the leaders of the Caesars Palace, company enterprise worldwide, UNLV quarterback back in the day. And so played against, I'm sure, the Wyoming Cowboys on the football field representing UNLV. And then maybe most famous of all, Bill Hornbuckle, who is MGM's CEO, came to UNLV not thinking he was going to study the gaming industry. He was thinking he was going to be a hotel guy, fell in love at the front desk in his first internship, but graduated in my college, the hotel college, which of course covers hospitality, gaming, tourism, all of the kinds of things that go along with this industry. So if you're feeling undereducated, you're not alone. If you're feeling perfectly well educated, then that's great. You'd be the only jurisdiction that I've ever run up against, because this isn't something that people typically cover in high school or junior high, right? These aren't topics that folks cover in the way that is needed in the global gaming industry, except at places like UNLV. So in thinking about the way in which the global gaming industry has grown worldwide, I'd like to share a recent TED Talk that I gave called The Fun Economy. You can look this up, or I can give you the in-person version here. And the fun economy is an industry that I think has gone overlooked and underappreciated over the past 10 years, because something incredible has happened. We define the fun economy as three very simple to define and understand industries: the tourism industry, the sports industry, and the entertainment industry. So those three industries, entertainment, by the way, includes the global gaming industry. Those three industries, global tourism, global sports, global entertainment, including gaming, is now 14% of the world's economy. 1-4. Now, if you're like me, you have no sense of what that means in terms of size, but that slice of the global pizza, again, 14% of every yen, peso, dollar spent on planet Earth was spent in the fun economy last year. And that's actually 9 times the size of the pharmaceutical industry. It's 7 times the size of the global apparel industry. It's 5 times the size of the global automobile industry. So the fun economy, those three industries, which of course include gaming, are now a global behemoth that dwarfs the industries that Elon Musk runs.
The industries that, again, you think about the automobile industry and how Henry Ford and Elon Musk are some of our business heroes because they created a dominant product in that world. And good for them. This is 5 times the size of that. Think of the fashion and apparel industry, right? Where the Armanis or the Phil Knights of Nike, right? Are the global giants that we respect. And we should admire these people. The global fun economy is 7 times the size of that combined industry, right? And cities like Indianapolis dominate the pharmaceutical world. That's where Eli Lilly has their headquarters. And in Indianapolis, they're very proud of that, and they should be, man. But man, this is much, much bigger than all of that. So if Wyoming does the fun economy right, again, this global tourism, entertainment, sports behemoth that is the fun economy, this is one of those worlds that is only going to get bigger and only going to be more important in the next 50 years. So one of the things I would observe is that this is happening on a planetary level on the back of a growing middle class. Now, in America, we're used to hearing about the struggles of the middle class, and that's very real. But 2 things can be simultaneously true. The middle class can be struggling in America, and the middle class worldwide today is exploding in ways that we often miss here in America, just because, again, we're in America and we're focusing on, of course, the things that are happening in our neighborhood. But let me share some statistics with you worldwide. And again, these are the consumers of the fun economy. In China last year, 35 million people joined the middle class from poverty. In India, another 35 million people did. But tens of millions of people are in countries like Mexico and countries like Kenya. And they're doing so on the back of a massive shift in the planet's ability to provide for its citizens on planet Earth. We live in the first time in the history of humanity where we just hit 50% of planet Earth is middle class or above. 50% of the 8 billion people on planet Earth, in other words, 4 billion people, are now middle class or above. And that number was tiny for most of human history. For most of human history, most of us were really, really poor. Now, here's where it gets interesting for the gaming industry. You know the first thing they start to buy when they join the middle class from poverty? And this was true in America when America had its middle class boom. It's true when the middle class boom happens worldwide. We tend to buy fun. Right? When we're poor, we only can buy stuff that we need. I mean, we're stuck buying diapers, right? Because we need diapers for our family. Once you join the middle class, you start to achieve, as by definition, disposable income. And the first thing that people start to buy worldwide are things in the fun economy. So if it's 14% now, it's going to be upwards of 20% moving forward. So if you think that as gaming regulatory leaders in Wyoming, you don't have a particularly important job, let me tell you, the next 50 years look like fun. The future of the entire economy is bending in the direction of buying experiences, not stuff, of buying lottery tickets and trips to a casino and trips to a Taylor Swift concert, not buying stuff. And generationally, this is even more true. As somebody who hangs out with 34,000 young people every single day at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, how many students we have, I can tell you, the younger generation, they want to buy experience, not stuff. So the kinds of things that you're regulating are the kinds of things that planet Earth are increasingly buying. What we need to make sure of course, is that they're done in a clean, well-regulated way. And so while at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, we have classes at the International Center for Gaming Regulation on everything possible you could imagine, right? If there's something that's stumped you as a regulatory body, I'm pretty sure we have a class on it. We have a class on leadership and gaming regulatory authorities. I'll share with you a brief story. One of the classes that we were teaching actually led to the founding of the Las Vegas Raiders. And that sounds crazy, but one of the things that I was saying in that class was that this is an industry that you not only have to be good at the walls inward stuff, like running your store, you also have to be good at the walls outward stuff, like regulating this industry, right? Because this is an industry that is stigmatized, and that if it goes wrong, right, if there's another mafia era, it's devastating, right? As we're seeing now with some of the major sports leagues, when there are unregulated or underregulated or not well-regulated environments. And at the time, this was 10 years ago, the NFL had been attacking gambling left and right. I know this sounds funny to all of you now, But 10 years ago, the NFL would not accept the what happens here stays here advertising campaigns from Las Vegas on the Super Bowl. And the reasoning was, we have a staunch anti-gambling perspective. What part of no don't you understand? We won't even let you pay us the $1 million or 30 seconds that you want to pay us and run these ads. They wouldn't let Tony Romo sign autographs at a convention center that was attached to a casino because they had a strict no gambling. And through that conversation, I ended up talking to some regulators from California. I ended up talking to folks who knew Mark Davis, the owner of the then Oakland Raiders. And they shared with me that Mark Davis actually had reserved LasVegasRaiders.com in 1999, but it had his wrist slapped, right? Because the NFL had said, look, what part of no don't you understand? Gambling is bad. Gambling is evil. This industry is not something we want to touch. And through that conversation, I was asked if I wanted to meet Mark Davis, and I said, sure, right? Thinking, well, this is a crazy thing for a gaming expert to get to do, is meet an owner of the NFL. And sure enough, he shows up a couple weeks later. It was a top secret article. If you Google this, if you Google my name and Mark Davis, there's a cute ESPN story about the top secret meeting that happened 2 years before anybody knew about it. And Mark Davis sat down and he said, look, the NFL's worried about a lot of things when it comes to gambling. They're worried about crime. They're worried about corruption. They're worried about problem gambling. They're worried about the way in which if you turn 80 young millionaires loose in Las Vegas, they'll get into all sorts of trouble. And I said, well, Mr. Davis, we actually have a lot of research on that here at the International Gaming Institute. And for countries and states around the world, we've been providing them with data so that they can make the best decisions for their home environment. So again, when we went to Thailand, we didn't say, hey, Thailand, here's what you have to do. We're telling you to do this. We said, hey, Thailand, here's all the research we have. Here's all that we have studied and found. Make the best decisions for Thailand, right? Ready, go. And when I was done telling Mark about all of the different things we had research on that the NFL was deathly afraid of, he said, can you put that in a fat report? And I said, sir, I'm a professor. Like, that is literally what I do for a living, right? Like, there's a lot of stuff I can't do. There's a lot of stuff you don't want to hire me to do. You don't want me to fix your air conditioning, that's for sure. But I can write a report that looks at all of the different things that people are afraid of with gambling and what the data say are actually true. And by the way, some of that stuff you should be afraid of. Some of that stuff you don't need to be afraid of because we fixed that, and some sort of in between. And so then he goes, do you like steak, Bo? And I said, yeah, but that's random. Why would you say that? And he said, because look, here's the deal. The NFL owners are all steak dinner guys. And we need to get 23 of them to vote yes to move a team from one city to another, because you've convinced me, that's one. And we need to get to 24 because 24 out of 32 is 3/4. And to move a team from one city to another, you need 3/4 to vote yes. So you might be having like 23 steak dinners at least, to convince these guys in these conversations about what the gaming industry is and what it isn't, and what the public perception is and what the regulated reality is. So fast forward to the Biltmore Hotel in Scottsdale, Arizona in March of 2017. I'm in there, they kick me out so the grownups can talk. And then I get a text, and I've been hanging out outside for not too long. And it says, yes, 31, no, 1. The Las Vegas Raiders have just been voted into existence. Congratulations on a new era of regulated, well-regulated industries combining in a new fun economy. They didn't say that part, but I thought that part. And that led to our research on, again, the way in which the world is changing, right? You may have noticed this, right? The sports betting world is changing just a little bit. There's a little bit of scrutiny. There's a little bit of controversy. There's a little bit of scandal, right? And that's why your jobs are so dang important, and why it is so important that you regulate this in a strong way. Because I'll give you another economic perspective. When Mark Davis moved to Las Vegas, he was worth $600 million, which was a ton of money. He's now worth $7.4 billion. And a good chunk of that is because of his skillful navigating of the fun economy in a way that's both respectful of the importance of, in a clean way, regulating it, but also doing so in a way that blended this new fun economy together. So I think we're on the cusp of a 50 years that looks like fun. I know we're all getting a lot of bad news these days, right? It seems like all of us doom scroll through, our phones, looking at all the bad news. Doesn't matter where you fall politically. There's always bad news, bad news, bad news, or stuff that upsets you. But a really happy story is happening. And that is that overall and in general, and not, of course, in every life everywhere, but the human experience is getting to play more, is getting to have fun more, is getting to engage something that our great great grandparents never got to do, right? When our great great grandparents lived, the fun economy was like 1% of the world's economy. When our great great grandparents lived, like 99% of planet Earth was pretty poor, right? And so we're living in a moment that's really, really interesting in a good news way that doesn't show up on your kind of Twitter feed, right? That doesn't show up in your doom scrolling. But it is a happy moment. Having said that, it's a moment that we need to handle right. It's a moment that needs a sophisticated leadership from folks just like you and all over the world. So, moving forward, I think that this is a good thing, right? That the gaming industry, that the fun economy in general is growing, is in fact exploding. It's likely to be a 20%, $1 in $5 spent on planet Earth, spent on the fun economy, is something that's probably 10 years out, right? That's kind of an amazing thing. So jobs in your industry, if you do this right, jobs in the gaming industry, jobs requiring the expertise like yours are only going to grow. Jobs in a way that reflect an expanded global thirst for these experiences and to buy these experiences are only going to increase. So if this was a stock, you'd invest in the fun economy. If this was a young student, you'd say, hey, this is going to be a CEO someday, right? And if you're somebody who is working in the fun economy, as you all are, and playing a vital, vital role, because a clean one is a successful one, the future looks quite, quite bright. So with that, that concludes my presentation. I told you I just had a handful of colorful slides that have fancy pictures. But I'd love to open it up for conversations because, of course, that's the best way that these things happen. I told you a story about a conversation in my class that if the guy hadn't spoken up in the class, we wouldn't have a Las Vegas Raiders. So that should be a lesson to speak up because you never know what might come of the conversations that we can have. So I hope all of that came through cleanly. I'm here, of course, to have a conversation and for this to be hopefully the beginning of a conversation on the proper regulation and healthy gaming industry that we all seek.
Any questions or comments for Dr. Bernhardt? 20%.
We're headed there. We're headed there globally, right? It used to be you bought stuff, right? And one of the things we're learning is that buying stuff doesn't make you terribly happy in the long term. Buying experiences does. And the fun economy is buying experiences, right? If you're zip lining or if you're playing at a craps table or if you're going to a Taylor Swift concert.
President Covello. A quick question. Could you by chance send me like the all of the education tracks that you all offer for commissioners?
Absolutely.
I'd really like to send that out to the board here so they can see if there's anything that would help them and they'd be interested in and get that going.
Yeah, we're not too far away. We're easy to access, and we've got lots and lots of classes. I'll just share a quick.
About sunshine.
Yeah, come on down. It's a good time to be down here.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and on everything from audit to background checks to and again, you're not alone. Like jurisdiction after if you ever, and you don't have to say this out loud, if you've ever been somebody who sat in that chair and said, man, I'm going to project expertise, but I don't know what the hell this nuanced conversation is, you're not alone. Almost every gaming regulator thinks that. You know who else thinks that? Almost every judge. And judges often are, people who are lawyers for a long time. And judges have something called the Judicial College, which is the first thing you do when you become a judge, is you go to the Judicial College and figure out how to weigh evidence. Take classes on, okay, it's going to be hard because I'm going to hear a case and this side's going to tell their story and it's going to sound really, really good. until the other side tells their story. And you're like, wow, that sounds really good too. How the hell do I decide? And that's what the judicial college does for judges. You're in obviously a similar situation where you've got to weigh evidence and make the best decision. And of course, resist pressures on all sides. And so one of the things we do, you had asked about sort of commission leadership, is, we have classes taught by gaming commission chairs and longtime chairs from all over the world. And we have classes where you'll be sitting next to folks in similar roles as yours. And that's a useful thing too, because then you develop a network, right? So I always say, like, you'll learn some of the stuff from us up here at the front of the stage. And I should say at the outset, I'm the big picture guy. I'm the guy that comes in at the beginning and does kind of the big picture stuff. And then we have experts in the specific areas that really do deep dives. But you'll also, in addition to us up front here, learn a ton from each other. And the best possible thing here is if you can pick up the phone and say, hey, friend at the New Jersey Gaming Commission, or friend at the California Gaming Commission, or friend at the Nevada Gaming Commission, awesome taking that class with you. Are you starting to see this in your state? Because here's something that's popped up in Wyoming, and man, we're trying to figure out, what are you doing, right? That kind of network, it's invaluable. In a field like this, where again, it's not like they teach this at every college, or there's a ton of like YouTube videos on how to be a gaming regulator, right? Like there's a YouTube video on everything, and there's just not on that, right? So yeah, that's what we do, and we'd be happy to send you the details on all that.
Dr. Bernhardt, that's exciting to know that you have that available. We have a whole room full of people that are convinced we have no idea what we're doing. And
You're not alone. You're not alone.
Commissioner Schiffer, floor is yours.
Mr. Bernhardt, very, very engaging talk. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about some of the things that are not under our control. I'm thinking now of these several indictments that are coming down in pro sports of people fixing games. Knowing what we can, knowing what we can control, but what we can't control. How do we deal with that kind of problem?
Outstanding question. Actually, that is probably the question, and once more, you're not alone, that every state regulator is trying to figure out right now, right? What is the federal government going to do? So I'll give you an illustration. So with prediction markets, right, the Kalshis of the world, and these groups that are doing the prediction markets, there's a real question over, and it's called federalism, right? What is states' rights? I mean, we learned this in civics and history class. And what does the federal government get to do, right? And in general, this has been an administration that's been, as most conservative administrations are, very pro states' rights. However, there is a moment right now where there is a movement for the federal government to get involved through the vehicle that is prediction markets. I think in general, the gaming industry has a really good argument that the states have done a really good job, because you think about it, like, again, the expertise here, the federal government does not have. But also each state is different in terms of what it offers in terms of gaming. And every state, I teach a whole class where we go state by state by state and country by country by country. And one of the points of the class is that every jurisdiction has its own unique relationship with gambling that they decide and then they execute, right? So the whole, moving forward, we're in a situation where I think the states' rights argument is much, much stronger. However, it's hard to know what the federal government's going to decide ultimately. In terms of indictments on the sports betting stuff specifically, that is something where, again, as things cross state lines, so for example, if somebody's placing a bet in one jurisdiction, but then they're playing a game in another, that is a moment where, the system we've set up is a federal system, right, to prosecute those kinds of things. And I think at that point, most of us would say, okay, I get it, right? Like, this is something where both, California, because it's a Golden State Warriors basketball player, and New Jersey, because that's where the bet was placed, are both interested in the outcome of this. Therefore, the feds have to get involved. However, I think in general, the states' rights argument, the kind of federalist argument, has been really good for the gaming industry and really good for America. And it's something that you should continue to fight for, is your own autonomy, your own right to govern. And you should do that, of course, ideally shoulder to shoulder with your state leaders in Wyoming. That's again, that's not a political statement. That's a research-based one looking at the way that this is played out.
Yes, Representative Davis.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is a little more technical. The internet, the root of all these, it's the railroad system. It's what are we going to do with the internet as far as what it's offering, and how do you regulate that environment?
Yeah, again, to the degree that the internet involves cross-state transactions, then you've got a federal issue. But the way that states have done this is actually not too dissimilar from the way that they've done it with physical environments. There are technology companies that are outstanding at things like geofencing. So for example, let's say that I'm a Wyoming businessman and I get permission to operate an internet gambling saloon. It's a bar, it's a dance hall, it's an internet gambling saloon, right? Where you can come in and gamble on the internet. And so I'm just, obviously making this up. What I need to make sure of course, with my internet gamblers is that they're in the state of Wyoming. And the geofencing companies are amazing at this. And you've probably learned this if you've ever gone on vacation and tried to sign in to like your subscriptions from back home. If you travel internationally, good luck signing into your Netflix, right? That's because of geofencing. They're really good at, it's amazing here in Nevada, when you drive across the state line and go into California, all your sports betting turns off because of the technological solutions to this, right? So internet gaming is actually something that has been in practice for decades now, internationally. And actually, this is one place where Europe has done a really good job. Each of those state lotteries has set up not only physical locations to gamble, but also internet-based locations to gamble. And again, last week in Lake Tahoe at this executive development program, we had executives from different European places where, once more, they offer not just in-person gambling, but also internet wagering. It's actually one of those things that we tend to be more afraid of than we should, because the technological solutions and regulatory ability to check those solutions has really, really advanced to a degree that you can be quite confident. So again, the tech side of that is something that we do some training on, and that GLI also does a lot of training on. To endorse anyone over at BMM, the other test lab does a lot of this as well. Those are, of course, the testing lab facilities that also have tremendous technical expertise in helping regulators understand some of those more technical matters. But these things are regulatable in ways that are sometimes surprising to me, at least, and I've been studying this my whole life.
Go right ahead, Ruben.
Thank you, Mr. President. That was very good. You must be an awful good teacher. You ought to do it.
Thank you.
So
that's all I ever wanted to be. Good teacher.
I guess I have a little different kind of question. When you talk about regulations and being a regulator, at what point is saturation of, and I'll preface what I'm saying. And I used to say it a little different. I used to say I get my mail in the least populated incorporated community in the least populated county in the least populated state. So about as rural as you're going to get. But Niobrara County, a neighboring county, fell behind us, so I can't say it anymore. But is that the regulators' responsibility to control growth for you don't have oversaturation, or is that a business decision that takes care of itself?
I think there's a third entity here, and not to create a battle between entities within government, but it's a policymaker decision as well, right? When policymakers create the laws around a given form of gambling, one of the things hopefully they make a decision on is, for example, the number of licenses that they're going to issue, and therefore the size and scope. So I think you're off the hook a little bit in that your job is to regulate it, right? Having said that, your job is to ensure a sustainable, clean industry, right? And so I can share with you that there have been real questions in Nevada, not so much in a size of the industry saturation sense, but from the sense of what is the Las Vegas Strip if what's gradually started to happen is basically like two companies own the whole street. In other words, if all the casinos on the Strip are owned by two people, right? Let's just call one of those people MGM and the other people Caesars, right? Because that's the reality. What happens if, again, you're like my great grandfather who was a casino dealer, and you lose your job on one side of the street, and you think you got screwed. You think that it wasn't really something that that was your fault. You go across the street, right? You only really have one other option in terms of places to work, right? So one of the things that's come up for the regulators in Southern Nevada is whether we have sort of an over concentration, right? Now that's a slightly different regulatory consideration. It's kind of like how regulators try to figure out every time Microsoft buys up a company, if Microsoft has gotten just too big and too dominant to the point where it hurts everyday people, right? But again, I think to a significant degree, this is something where shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm, or at least in conversation with your policymakers, with your governor, right, with the political leaders, is the ideal. And hopefully you have a good relationship there that you can build.
Anyone else? Anyone else from out in the audience have any questions, comments?
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Anytime, and we're just down the road. I actually used to play. I played some youth baseball tournaments in Casper, so I have proven historically that I'm willing to drive there because I did so when I was a little baseball player back in the day. So we're happy to be a good neighbor here in Nevada if there's anything you need.
Planned conferences in February and January.
Oh, great.
Well, President Covello, so the one thing that I would, maybe take away from a lot of this is I think it shows the importance of, well thought out, well-crafted rules and ensuring that those rules are not just words on paper. I know we've come leaps and bounds the last several years. We just need to continue working through and making sure that we have, a process in place to where we're constantly reviewing rules, because this industry changes by the minute. It changes constantly. So having those well-crafted, well-worded regulations and, the enforcement of those regulations, I think is also equally important. So thank you very much. That was great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bernhard.
All right, take care.
Cheers.
President Covello, you want to move to the next one, or do you
Please
want to
do.
take another break?
Thanks, Director Laramendi. Let's move on.
Do we
And
want to
feel-
draw straws
feel
on the
free to
next
take a
one?
break as you need, which you will.
Okay. President Covello, so the next speaker will be Mr. Lisa. I'll let him also kind of give a little bit of his background and introduce himself and take it from there.
My name is Greg Lisa, first off.
You've got time. No hurry.
BSA and AML,
You came already.
something that I hear about a lot of, something that we hear a lot about in banking, a lot. BSA and AML. Yeah.
So what was his answer on saturation?
You have two cards.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation to be here. President Covello and members of the commission. Also like to extend my special thanks to Sarah Beth, that she's been just phenomenal just in terms of organizing it and giving the invitation. I'm really, I've never been to Wyoming before. I come from the East Coast and I've never seen such beauty in nature, and it's really something. I spent most of my career in government. I spent actually about 10 years in the Department of Justice as an organized crime prosecutor, playing cops and robbers. Did everything from Italian organized crime to different things around Russians and different organized crime groups and gang groups as well. And it was really, to my mind, it was not just enjoyable, but I went into work every day saying, I can't believe they paid me to do this. I spent a good chunk after that, after doing law enforcement, sitting in your shoes. I was a regulator with the federal government, first at the CFPB and then within Treasury, doing anti-money laundering work. And I still think that anti-money laundering is, to my mind, one of the most interesting things I've ever done in my life. I would do it for free. My creditors would not understand that, but I would absolutely do it for free. Just also one other thing about myself that I should point out, I'm terrified of pelicans. And I will mention that only because of this. Before coming here, I actually had to do some research, which of course I thoroughly did by checking on ChatGPT, does Wyoming have pelicans? And in fact, you do, which was shocking to me. So to the extent that I point that out during the course of this presentation, if anyone here has a pet pelican, I will both apologize in advance and question your judgment. I am thankful, though, that the Wyoming state flag is a very robust, heroic buffalo, unlike the flag of Louisiana, which I still don't understand why they would choose this demon from the deep. Oh, absolutely. I figured I was so short that it wouldn't make a difference. And so for people wondering why I'm not standing, it's because I am in fact standing. It's just not much difference between me seated and otherwise. Is that better? Or is it too close or not close enough? Okay, great. Thanks so much. Want to talk about a couple of different items. I have a ton of slides, which I will rip through very quickly, but feel free at any point, anyone, just to stop me, say, slow down, or we want to pause here and deep dive into it, because I can, I'll send this around if it's of use. There are so many topics within the world of AML and the gaming industry that I just wanted to cover just a 30,000-foot view along it. I'm really, it's very difficult to follow Bo, just because, I mean, for every intellectual mountain like him, there's an intellectual valley like me. But my world and most of the practice that I do is very engaged either as a regulator or with regulators. I work with regulators all over the world. I also happen to run it is the largest North American gaming compliance conference. We run that in Vegas in mid-September. We have people from all over the country. We have some foreign delegations come in to learn all about anti-money laundering compliance. It's not about any other topics. It's just AML, illicit finance, sanctions evasion, things on that, because it's not just because it's so damn interesting, even though it is. It's because I want to do something that would make a difference to my children and my children's children, right? First off, playing cops and robbers, like actually being a trial lawyer, like doing organized crime classes, no greater fun. It's like being on stage. It really is. When you are up there at the U.S. Attorney's Office and fighting the bad guys and really like life and death sometimes decisions, like there's no greater source of adrenaline. And if I didn't do that, I would become a meth addict because I need that adrenaline. But doing AML is like the equivalent of my meth because it really is enjoyable. But let's talk about what we're going to cover today. A couple different things. First off, what is money laundering? And how do you launder it through? How do you launder money through a casino? I'm not recommending that. I'm not trying to do a how-to video or anything like that. I would say, actually, I lean against doing illicit finance, okay? But to be able to prevent it, you actually need to know how to do it, how the bad guys are doing it. Because people in illicit finance, third-party money launderers, drug cartels, human traffickers, weapons traffickers, they all need to do one thing. They may profit from their crimes, but they can never spend the proceeds of their crimes unless they make it clean. And when you think about it, when you unpack it, almost all criminal activity, with the exception of crimes of passion, maybe ideological crimes, maybe, spontaneous assault, maybe ideological terrorism, but everything else, not just bank robbery, but drug trafficking, human trafficking, weapons trafficking, has a profit motive. And so that's why anti-money laundering, not just for casinos, but for banks and other types of financial institutions, is so critical. Because when I was playing cops and robbers, we could pick up as many drug dealers off the street as possible. It's only when we were able to follow the money, only when we were able to actually trace up, where the profits were going, that we saw who was in control. So that's the first thing we're going to look at. Second is a look at the regulatory landscape, just AML at 30,000 feet. We're going to look at the scope and shape of AML enforcement, both civil and criminal. We'll do a case study because to me, I can look at regulations all day and I won't understand it until I see it in practice. And one of the things that we did back at FinCEN and my old shop within Treasury, where we did anti-money laundering, was we tried to make sure that in each of our enforcement actions, we made sure that we unpacked and explained why the agency was doing what it was doing. We wanted to make sure we articulated, look, this is what this casino was doing wrong. These are the laws that it violated. This is the harm that it caused. And this is why we're imposing this penalty, either on the company itself or sometimes on the officers and directors of the company, the people who are responsible. If we do have time, gonna look real quickly at the Culture of Compliance Advisory. It's something that my agency put out during my tenure there. I didn't write it. If so, it would have had a lot more typos. But basically, it was a high-level view based on this premise, that you can have all the policies and procedures in the world you want. You can have all the regulations in the world you want. Just like your director was just talking about. You can have all of those in place, but if you don't enforce it and if you don't live it, then they won't have any effect. You can enforce against a company, you can investigate a company, and they may have the most spotless or robust regulations or internal procedures in place. But if they don't enforce them, if they don't actually live them, then that's going to be the source of their undoing. And so, many people will say that culture eats policy for breakfast. Culture eats policy for breakfast. And then finally, we can do some takeaways if we've got time. But again, always feel free to stop me and unpack it. Let's take a look at what money laundering is. There's a traditional definition here, which is this whole, sometimes if you take an AML, an AML course off of some of the providers, or even if you YouTube it, there's actually an interesting, vignette in Breaking Bad, where the lawyer there, Better Call Saul Goodman, was explaining it in this 3-step process of placement, layering, and integration. Placement, putting something into a financial institution, layering, making it opaque through a series of transactions or through a series of money movements, and then finally integration, actually finding some way to spend that money or to make it look legitimate. And ultimately, this is one of several models. I'll tell you that when I'm giving my classes or running my conference, I unpack it a little bit differently, but at least according to law enforcement and the intelligence community, somewhere between 1 to 2 trillion of money is laundered annually. Some of that is through trade-based money laundering, actually a big chunk of it. But so if you look at some of the traditional sources, they will describe this graphically. So in the upper left quadrant, there's this bad guy. You know he's a bad guy. Why? Because he's talking on the phone while driving. That's how you know he's a criminal, right? So, and people are just handing this guy money. So those are his illicit proceeds. And so to place it, he places it in a bank. How do you know it's a bank? Because it has these pillars, but most importantly, it has the word bank across the bottom. That's in the upper right quadrant. Then they go down to the lower right quadrant, and that's where we're talking a little bit closer about the layering process. And again, this is their model, not mine. I'm not creating reality, I'm just reporting it. But at least according to this UNODC model, the UN Office on Drug Control, it goes to this purple planet, which is orbited by at least 2 tangerines, and then moved over into the integration phase, where people can buy anything from, again, I'm not trying to like make too light of this model, other than this is something that was written by an FBI analyst back during the Reagan administration, and it does have some utility. It has a very limited utility because you can launder money in a lot of ways that have nothing to do with the placement layering integration model, which is why I typically show this instead. This is like really useless, and if you want to have a very limited scope aperture of understanding money laundering, absolutely study the Purple Planet model. This is the more simple model. Money laundering is just this. It's making bad money look clean. That's all it is. That's all it is. Finding some ways, whether it's by placement, layering, and integration, or some other method, to make your illicit proceeds, your drug proceeds, your fraud proceeds, anything else, look like it's clean. Why? Because if it's not clean, you can't use it. You can't invest it. You can't put it in a bank. You can't buy a house, because there are AML checks on everything. So again, I'm not endorsing this. I'm not encouraging it. Anyone who wants a YouTube video on how to launder proceeds, I am not your facilitator here. But having looked at this a little bit, again, the refresher as to what it is, another disgusting pelican. Different ways of talking about money laundering and how to launder money through a casino, how casinos are used knowingly or often unknowingly as a vehicle for laundering illicit proceeds. Well, many casinos offer bank-like services. They may say, we are only entertainment. We are only entertainment, right? Yeah, but okay, do you wire funds? Yes, we do that, but we're not a bank. That's Wells Fargo. You know, do you do foreign currency exchange? Yes, but you're talking about Bank of America when you're talking about a financial institution. Do you cash checks? Do you hold deposits? Do you offer credit? So the government, in its wisdom and judgment, has said casinos, like other types of financial services businesses, are going to be treated under at least federal law and often under state law as a type of financial institution. We'll get into the consequences of that in a second. There are plenty of other ways, including using opaque transactions, either using fake IDs or by doing proxy betting, either online or sometimes in person. There's chip walking, where someone actually purchases a bunch of chips and then never wagers with them. And so the casino isn't aware of what happens. Often what happens is in the bathroom, in a hotel room, in a parking lot, or off-site, they're actually using that as a source of currency. Someone can go and perform minimal gaming. What happens there? They buy in for maybe $25,000, maybe $50,000. They come in, they grab a Chardonnay or a beer. They may wager $50 of that. And then all of a sudden they come back with their chips, they go back to the cage, and they get the remainder. Now all of a sudden, what do they have? They don't have a bunch of 5s and 10s of drug proceeds. They have clean bills. They've got clean bills. And if they wager well enough, even if they lose, if they wager well enough, they can actually have a tax receipt. So if they get pulled over by the DEA, why do you have all these funds? Well, I won at the casino. Here's my receipt. I'm actually paying taxes on that. There are plenty of other ways where a casino is used as a financial institution or as a vehicle for laundering funds, including things like use of Tito machines, ticket in, ticket out machines. So you can stuff bills, and then all of a sudden, what do you have? You got a printed out receipt that is effectively payable on demand. You go up to the cage. You then redeem it for what? For clean cash. So those are some, not always, to use it. This one is the simplest. To my mind, this is the easiest one to understand. This is just both sides betting. Easiest way to understand it is just on a roulette wheel. Again, I'm not endorsing this. Please don't do this at home. Don't do this at any casino that I represent or work at. So basically, two bad guys, conveniently named accomplice A and B, they go and they have $100,000 of drug proceeds. And what do? They go up to the roulette wheel separately. Each of them has $50,000 of what? Drug proceeds. They can't bring it to the bank. They can't buy a house with it. Very suspicious carrying around $50,000 or $100,000. And so what happens? Well, A places $50,000 on black. B places it on red. The wheel is spun. What happens? Yep, we'll get to that one in a second. I'm just thinking, you're on slide 17. I'm on slide 16. So outcome one is that black wins $100,000. The guy who bet on red walks out, but again, they're co-conspirators, so it doesn't matter. They have what? They have $100,000 of winnings. Or the converse can happen. Or you can hit on green, the 0 or 00. What's the percentage of that? 5.26% chance of loss, of losing everything. You lost both halves of that bet. And that's the house cut, right? With that, that's the percentage wager. So that's your cost of doing business. That's your cost of doing business, a 5.26% chance of loss. Versus if you get a professional third-party money launderer, I know this because I've prosecuted some of them, I've interviewed some of them. I wanted to become one day, but I just, my mom wouldn't like it. She just wouldn't like it. Mom, I hope you do something very special. Yes, I'm a third-party money launderer. Anywhere up to 32% is basically the street charges. There are some other, you can get something less. You can negotiate down on quantity. But I think typically I've seen anywhere between 15 to 32% There are some organizations that are much more sophisticated of it with technology, with crypto, with some other mechanisms, and you could drive that price down. But no matter what, 5.26% isn't a bad cost. And if you get the W2G, the wager winnings, then again, you have a paper trail. You have a paper trail. You want to deposit a casino check into your bank, you'll do it. Because, hey, listen, yeah, this is a winning. It was proven by this. So, oh God, I chose violence today. So, recent advisory came out August 25th or 28th, 28th, I think, from my old shop, FinCEN, about a really interesting law enforcement illicit finance trend, something that's been detected by law enforcement and the intelligence community about something that's not just affecting casinos and card clubs, but financial services institutions generally, which has to deal with Chinese money laundering organizations. Here's the interesting triangle here. The first is that certain countries, especially China, but also Malaysia and Russia and other countries, their citizens, especially wealthy citizens, there is a limit on how much money they can get out of the country. In China, it's about the equivalent of $50,000 per year. So if you are a wealthy Chinese business owner and you're trying to get money out of the country to avoid it potentially getting seized if you're on the wrong side of the party, or taxed, or you just want it secreted somewhere else because you want to acquire assets, you need to find some way to get that money out. And so there's a dollar shortage. And sometimes those people are just trying to wager here in the US. Similarly, on the other side of the equation are drug cartels that are all of a sudden very cash heavy. They've been trafficking in fentanyl or cocaine or other illicit substances, and now they have a whole lot of cash. There are several different typologies. Again, forget about the purple planet placement, layering, and integration, even though you could try to shoehorn it into that model, where basically the law enforcement community and the intelligence community have detected and explained how these organizations, these money laundering networks in the US are operating to get funds from the cartel members to people coming in, some wealthy gamblers and other wealthy individuals who are in need of US currency in the US. I actually have a separate, completely separate module on this that I've taught to different casinos. We had a really excellent presentation from one of my colleagues who works at another casino. We had him present at our conference last September. It's very interesting, and the analysis and data of it is coming out even more that FinCEN has flagged the issue. But there's the advisory. I'm happy to send this around. And it basically describes a couple of different typologies, including use of mirror transactions. So if there's a transfer of funds here in the US, some people go up to a hotel room and there's a courier there with a duffel bag full of cash, $100,000, $200,000 worth of cash. And there's nothing in exchange for that other than a QR code. Or they actually meet and there's then the message back saying, okay, I received this cash in the hotel room at Casino X. I'm going to go down and wager with it. And basically then authorizing the payment of that back in China. There are also use of money mules. In other words, people trying to send in small amounts of currency, $8,000, $7,000 into financial institutions to fly under the radar of some of the detection scenarios. So again, this is the very simplistic view. Doesn't involve any elaborate graphics. So number one way that people launder money through casinos, just spending it. Bad guys spending money. They like spending money as much as anyone else does. And as a matter of fact, if you have illicit proceeds and you run it through a financial institution, that is itself a federal offense. That's actually considered one form of money laundering, even though it's not actually making it clean, it's just using it. It's called money laundering spending offense. It's under 18 U.S.C. 1957. So this is one thing, one way. If someone goes into your casino, if you're a casino and someone takes illicit proceeds and spends more than $10,000 of it, that itself is a federal offense. So we're going to talk about the regulatory and legal landscape, but let me just pause right there. Have I made at least a semblance of sense up this far about at least the nature of the problem? Okay. Hi. Yep. I have. Yes, I have. Under the federal system, under the Bank Secrecy Act, because racetracks are not regulated as casinos, because they're not regulated by states as casinos, they're not covered by the federal rules. They're not covered by at least the Bank Secrecy Act rules. The potential, and I think overall the risk is going to be somewhat lower, not entirely lower, because you can still have a bad guy who would not be allowed to play proxy bet. You can still have, depending on how much the game is structured, you know, if there are top two favorites, someone doing the equivalent of a roulette wheel, both sides betting. You could do that also for sports wagering. You could do that for skill-based games, skill-based entertainment games. There actually have been, I actually just gave a presentation to Interpol, or I beg your pardon, to Europol a little while ago about use of in-game currency, you know, the rough equivalent of in-game wagering or skill-based wagering, and how that can be used to move illicit proceeds. So there are analogs, not on all fours though. Not on all fours. It is a different, and I think candidly, when the rules were being written, the assessment was made that racetracks are likely of lower risk, both in terms of volume as well as in scale. It doesn't mean zero risk. And look, what's the best way to if you want to completely stop money laundering, you shut down everything, right? That's not an option. Right. So here's the 30,000 foot thing, which is, I talked before about spending in a casino being a violation in itself. And they're under the federal laws, including the criminal laws, it's basically a distinction here. There's a distinction between money laundering, thou shalt not launder money, and the requirement for some entities to have anti-money laundering programs in place. Anyone who's run a bank has noticed that distinction. Title 18 offenses. This is where most of the criminal law is written. There are some drug offenses in Title 21. There are some criminal offenses in other parts of the code, but the general federal criminal code is in Title 18 of the US Code. And basically it is a prohibition, and it doesn't matter who you are, financial institution or otherwise, you shall not launder money. And it doesn't matter whether you're a bank, doesn't matter whether you're an individual person or a shoe store. You shall not launder money. Different types of money laundering. There's money laundering concealment. I'm a drug dealer and I try to run that through a bank account and under my wife's name. Or I try to buy a business to make it look clean. Money laundering promotion. If I not only buy that money, not only do I buy that business with illegal proceeds, but I then use that business to generate further proceeds in a fraud scheme. Or maybe I'm a drug dealer. I buy a car that I use to move my product. That's money laundering promotion. Then money laundering spending. Just taking a certain amount of money of illicit proceeds and then putting it into a financial institution. Doesn't matter whether you do it openly, and doesn't matter whether you use it to promote. Money laundering spending is that third type of account. That is typically charged criminally. There is a civil provision. It's not often charged that way. But so that's the one side of the equation. The thing that actually pertains to AML is this right-hand side, which is Title 31 offenses. And essentially what this is this. If you're a financial institution, and that could be a casino, that could be a bank, that could be a broker dealer, a precious metals dealer, a crypto exchange, you have, congratulations, you have this casino license, you have a bank charter, you have the authorization to do precious metals dealings or to be a crypto exchange. In addition to all the other regulations that are imposed on you, you also have an obligation to combat and detect money laundering. So it's an affirmative obligation, and it doesn't matter whether or not you're facilitating it or not. You have to take certain steps in place. So there we go. Another topic. Where do they get these pictures? I don't know. So that's boiling down of the distinction between a Title 31. Really, AML is focused on the right-hand side. The effort is to try to prevent what happens on the left-hand side by going after the choke points, right? By going after the financial institutions. Because if you're a bad guy, if you're a drug dealer, you're basically going to try to go to a financial institution to launder your proceeds. So different types of institutions are covered, anywhere from banks to casinos to commodities brokers to securities dealers, precious metals, et cetera. That's all done on a risk basis. If Treasury decides in the future to regulate racetracks the same way, they would have to go through a rulemaking process. They would actually probably have to get the statute changed for racetracks. But there are some types of products that the statute would also authorize, but that FinCEN hasn't yet written regs for. And here are the three regulations, or the three overall principles of the rules that apply. So if we're talking about the rules that apply to any of those types of financial institutions, whether you're a money services business like a check casher or a money transmitter, or if you're a casino or a bank, by and large, your obligations are going to be very similar. Not identical, but very similar. And it's basically these three. Here are the main rules in place. First, you have to have some internal controls in place, or some AML program in place, which includes internal controls. Reporting and record keeping, and those are the three. Reporting is 2, and then record keeping is 3. Boiling them down just a little bit. Boy, they are ugly animals. So first one is implementing and maintaining an AML program. And here it is. They basically have six prongs or 6 pillars to it. I won't spend too much time burning through it, but here's a quick walkthrough. It's generally 6 of them. Having internal controls in place. That's your policies and procedures. Independent testing. Have to have training of personnel in AML and your AML policy and program. You have to have someone who is in charge, someone who actually oversees, who is skilled and knowledgeable in AML to oversee the program itself. You have to use, this one is unique to casinos, it's use of all available information. And the concern was that casinos and other gaming institutions collect a lot of information. They will walk in, a rich patron walks in, and the host knows not just his wife's name, but his girlfriend's name. They know your drink preferences. They know where you work. They know a lot about you for marketing and credit purposes. And the point of this subpart, this prong, this pillar 5, is to make sure that all of that also gets used for AML compliance, so that there's not a siloing of information. And then finally, if you have automated data processing services or systems in place, you need to use it for compliance. People ask me what that means. That's what I told them when I was a regulator. Anything north of an abacus is probably an automated data service. So here's the 6 of them. Here's another piece of violence against pelicans. The next regulation in place. So you have the independent controls in place, or having an AML policy and procedure in place. Next one is you've got to file required reports. Overall, there are lots of different types of reports, but there are 2 big ones. First one is CTRs, or currency transaction reports. Anyone who's ever tried to deposit or withdraw more than $10,000 of a bank has seen one of these before. And it's not saying that you're doing anything necessarily wrong. It's just the government saying, hey, listen, $10,000? The government wants to know about that. They want to know, why is someone taking out that much money? Maybe it's because, or why are they depositing that much money? Maybe it's because they run a gas station and they're a cash-intensive business. Or maybe they're a drug dealer. But no matter what, we just want to register who is taking large amounts of currency in or out. And then the next one is suspicious activity reports. And we'll talk about each of these very, very quickly. Currency transaction reports, CTR, again, it's $10,000. The biggest concern that most casinos and other financial institutions have is this thing called structuring, which is an independent federal crime. Someone tries to bring $12,000 to the cage. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Lacey, you're gonna need to fill out this $12,000. They all of a sudden walk away. Now they come back and they want to deposit. They just want to now cash out $6,000, but they go to another window, or their best friend comes up with the other 6,000. That's structuring. It's breaking stuff up into different smaller amounts so as to fly underneath the radar. Happens all the time. It also happens to be a federal crime. It's one of the things that AML programs are meant to be on the lookout for. The other one, the more enjoyable one, is suspicious activity reports, or SARs. SARs are highly confidential. They're not classified in the set. Back when I was at DOJ and also at Treasury, I had a security clearance. Had nothing to do with SARs or not. SARs are a different form of confidentiality. It's also protected by government statute. There are also criminal penalties for disclosing it, much as if I had disclosed top secret information when I had access to that. SAR information is just under a different regulation. And essentially, this is tip and lead information to be given to law enforcement, given to Treasury to then pass on to law enforcement and the intelligence community. And so basically, if you're a financial institution and you don't have to know it, you don't have to be able to prove it, you don't have to have ironclad, notarized blood samples and confessions. No, you have to know, suspect, or have reason to suspect that there was something suspicious about that transaction or even an attempted transaction, even if something that was not consummated. And so essentially, if someone files, commits this suspicious transaction or attempted transaction, the casino or other financial institution is required to file a SAR. And there are both civil and criminal penalties for failing to do that. And so what's considered suspicious? Well, if it's illegal activity, again, if they know, suspect, or have reason to suspect, it comes from illegal activity. How can you know that? Maybe it's from the person's background. You did a criminal background check when the person was signing up for a casino marker. Someone comes in and they try to deposit a whole lot of money, but there are noticeable amounts of cocaine residue on it. Maybe that's a reason to suspect. By the way, in terms of the dollar bills that, or let's just say 10s and 20s in your wallet, anyone here know what percentage of those ballpark have trace amounts of beg your pardon, cocaine residue on it? Not a lot, between 80 to 90%. Yeah, now, that's not because everyone's snorting with those. Like I don't judge, people do, but no, it's mostly because of bank counting machines and casino counting machines. So they infect each other a lot. But there's a lot of cocaine. There's a lot of drug residue on dollar bills, on especially 10s and 20s. So if the funds are derived from illegal activity, it's also if the transaction itself is attempting to disguise funds, sometimes through proxy betting, sometimes through other means of trying to disguise not just the ownership of the funds, but who controls it or the source of the location of those funds. If it's designed to evade a certain reporting requirement, for instance, by structuring, when someone goes up to the window and then tries to put in $6,000 here and then $6,000 at another window, or goes to different bank branches. Sometimes that happens as well. And then finally, if it just doesn't look right, if there's no apparent or lawful purpose. Let's take that example of the both sides betting. Someone comes in, let's assume it's not two people. Let's assume it's just one person. And the person comes down and bets 50,000 on black, 50,000 on red. Why would someone in their right mind do that? My grandmother used to do that. She used to do $10 because she used to do $10 on black, 10 on red, so she could tell people she won at the casino. And my grandmother was not a drug dealer after 1978. But if someone does that with $10,000 or $20,000 or $50,000, there's no sensible reason for doing that. You're just risking your 5.26% on that. And so if it has no apparent or lawful purpose, and you do some investigation and it still doesn't make sense, then that should also be reported as a SAR. And what happens with those SARs? Well, they're confidential, so they're kept in a secure database. And it's used by both law enforcement and the intelligence community to do what? To help develop cases. Sometimes for tip and lead information to see if there's illicit finance happening in some place. Sometimes it's to understand a better network of a criminal organization. When I was a prosecutor, we used them all the time. We used them all the time to see who accomplices were and also to see who controlled the money, who controlled the funds. So that's what SARs are. That's what a Pelican is. Okay, a couple of other very boring reporting obligations, but I'm just going to include it in the deck without talking much about it. So finally, casinos, like other financial institutions, are required, in addition to having an AML program in place, reporting certain types of transactions, SARs and CTRs. They're also required to maintain certain records. That doesn't mean they always have to report them to the government, but they have to keep them just in case the government decides to subpoena them or request them otherwise. And there are a couple of specific ones to casinos, like negotiable instrument logs and monetary transaction logs. If someone takes a line of credit, there are certain thresholds by which they have to keep those. I wouldn't say this is the most exciting part of AML. It's not. Even though it is charged. And even though these are the rules as they exist right now on November 20th, there are some changes happening. FinCEN itself has proposed a new AML program rule. My old office, the overseer of the AML regime, has proposed a new program rule. There's a legislative proposal called the Streamline Bill, which is attempting to raise the thresholds to make it a little bit more, let's just say, a little bit less onerous for financial institutions to comply with, especially banks who have complaining. It's like, look, the penalties go up every year. The penalties go up every year. And why don't the SAR thresholds go up? Why do we still have to file a SAR at $5,000? Why shouldn't that be at least indexed for inflation? And so there is a bill to potentially change that. There are also some new authorities that don't have to do specifically with these Title 31 rules. Some of them are related to OFAC and sanctions. It's not formally AML, but there are some other FinCEN authorities. OFAC and FinCEN are kind of sister agencies under the same subcomponent of Treasury. There are also other authorities that FinCEN has used to address illicit finance concerns, most recently having to deal with Russia, and even more recently having to deal with drug cartels that have been designated by the State Department. And the concern is drug cartels trying to use U.S. financial institutions. Also, and I think this is true, there's, given a new administration, and this is with every administration, new personnel means new policies. Sometimes policy, the interest of a specific director, whether it's the Secretary of the Treasury, we reported up to the Undersecretary of the Treasury for illicit finance. And if she or he had different interests or different focus, then we would obviously have to follow that lead. And there are some new business models. There are some things that actually didn't exist back in the 1970s that look a lot like casinos, that look a lot, whether they're prediction markets or some types of vendor models or skins that look a lot like casinos that may not be covered under this rule, or that the rule is at least gray as the scope of coverage. And then finally, and I think this last one is the biggest, exogenous events. 9/11 changed the AML rules and the government surveillance rules. AML is basically one way that the government surveils financial transactions, is looking for bad guys using financial institutions, by everything from SAR reporting to requiring people to get training to how to look for suspicious transactions. It's just one way for the government to surveil to see if bad guys are using the financial system. And so if there is another 9/11, if there is another FTX, if there is another financial crisis, I would expect that, much like the financial crisis affected the consumer protection rules, I would expect that the AML rules are going to change. If there's a huge fraud thing, someone says, here's an example, Bernie Madoff with millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars. And then all of a sudden what happened? There were some AML changes, mostly in enforcement, but there were a couple of tweaks along some of the regulations too. 9/11 absolutely affected it, both in terms of information sharing and other ways that the law was leveraged. So those are the three basic requirements. Those requirements, again, here are the three: AML program, and having CTRs and SARs, and having reporting. Even though they're distinct requirements you can violate, and often companies do violate them separately, what happens when the pillars themselves fall? I think a lot of these are very interrelated, and here's how. If you don't have a proper AML program in place, let's just say you don't train your people properly, you don't have the right internal controls in place, so you don't have good aggregation techniques to see if someone is stacking or going to different windows. If you don't have good technology, if you don't have a good chief compliance officer in place, your reporting is going to suffer. If you don't have good record keeping in place, you probably won't be able to file CTRs properly. And so what happens? Well, this is what happens. If the government catches you, here are the penalties. They go up every year. That's why they're odd numbers. Record keepings are actually pretty low at 26,000, but the unit of prosecution is per record. The AML program rule is 71,545, but that's for every day that there's a program deficiency in place. So if a company, whether a casino or a bank or otherwise, at least their notional exposure is about 26 million per year. The enforcement never goes up that high. It's usually negotiated down, but at least that's the amount of exposure. AML rules on the federal civil side have a 6-year statute of limitation, so that actually can bulk up pretty quickly over time. So, and here's the rationale behind it. They didn't want non-compliance or the penalties for non-compliance to be the cost of doing business. If a bank or a casino or a broker-dealer says, sure, I violated the AML, what's the cost? Oh, I got it right here. Hold on. Do you guys take a post-dated personal check? They don't want that to be just a simple cost of doing business. There are other penalties, of course, in place as well. I think I used that one before, didn't I? Yeah. So there are criminal penalties for this. The scienter obviously has to be higher. It has to be knowing. There are several state agencies. AML used to be an almost entirely federal interest. New Jersey actually was probably early on in having state interest in this, but Nevada definitely is as well. California has gotten into the game of having AML. New York definitely has, not for casinos, but for other financial institutions. An AML violation can absolutely have an effect on your licensing, because while FinCEN can't revoke a casino license, often a casino regulator, a licensing regulator, will see if there's an AML violation. And there can also be parallel actions. So there have been plenty of times when the state has taken an action immediately after the federal government has, or there have been times when there have been parallel actions, a simultaneous action between both the federal government, US Treasury, and the state regulator for exactly the same conduct. New York DFS does that quite a lot. Nevada Gaming Control Board. I just finished up a case where I was defending a California card club, and they're also right now getting, for a FinCEN action, and right now they're getting chased by the state regulator as well for exactly the same conduct. And they're also hidden regulators. What do I mean by that? If you're a casino, if you're a money services business, you need a bank operating account. No bank in the world is just going to look the other way if you are involved in AML violations, especially if they're serious AML violations. At the very least, your chief compliance officer, your casino, is going to get called in for a bank review to say, hey, listen, why don't you have a good policy in place? What was it with you missing all these CTRs? Why is it that you haven't trained your people since the Eisenhower administration? So sometimes I could read minds. So, whoa, sparkle, look at that. This is a trajectory of civil enforcement, federal civil enforcement, from FinCEN, my old office. There was a big chunk in the middle there from 2014 to 2016, where there were about, I think, 8 cases that were brought all within time. And some of them were small. Some of them were very big, like Trump Taj Mahal, like Caesar's Palace, like Hawaiian Gardens was one of the biggest card clubs in California. And then recently in 2024, Lake Elsinore was a smaller card club or a mid-sized card club in California. So, and those were all from FinCEN, my old shop, out of a component of US Treasury. There's a similar bird. So there have been also non-FinCEN enforcement cases when I was pointing out how both criminal law enforcement and states have been really interested in it. MGM and Cosmopolitan was brought by the LA US Attorney's Office, as also by the Nevada Gaming Control Board. Wynn, Resorts World, Lake Elsinore, that was a FinCEN case, but they also had a state action. There are other enforcement actions currently being considered and negotiated and brought right now in various states, including Nevada, California, New Jersey, and elsewhere. Again, 10 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, this was considered just a federal interest. And then a bunch of states said, wait a minute, we don't want that happening on our watch either. Like, that's a violation. Sometimes that is a separate violation of state law, but if nothing else, just for the reputation and integrity of the business, we don't want people coming to our properties, our casinos, our money transmitters, and laundering money at our institutions as well. So we're going to make sure that we penalize that on the state side. So I'm going to, let me jump up to, okay, case study before I get to class, and then then I'll wrap it up. This is one, and there are several very interesting cases. This is from a mid-sized Nevada casino in Sparks, Nevada. It was actually sold to new owners shortly before the enforcement action itself. They had an exam. IRS is the examination or the supervisory authority. Actually, they perform the audit, and it's not a tax audit. They're actually looking to see if you're complying with BSA. So they look at your transactions, they look at your SAR data, they look at your policies and procedures, and they'll interview your staff to see what they do. It is the equivalent of a warrantless search without probable cause for anyone who's been involved. It is much like, I mean, or the other equivalent would be like a health code examination or a proctology exam, depending on your analogy. But basically, they don't need a warrant. And the framework is this, much like with the OCC with bank examiners or the FDIC or a state regulator. They shouldn't have to go in and subpoena information. They are here for the safety and integrity and compliance of this institution. And no one is forced to be a financial institution, but if you do, that means you are voluntarily subjecting yourself to examination and review, much like you can all review the entities under your jurisdiction. And often you wouldn't need a subpoena or other authority to do it. So what happens? Well, they find what FinCEN called as a systemic violation or a systemic series of violations. Again, here's the overview of the different requirements, the 6 prongs of the AML program rule, the reporting, CTRs and SARs, as well as record keeping. And if you were looking for a way to violate basically almost everything on this page, Sparks Nugget found a way to do it. So what did they do? They had no independent testing at all. They had insufficient internal controls, especially around SAR filings and SAR surveillance. So in other words, they weren't even looking or attempting to look for suspicious activity. I'll show you an example in just a moment. They didn't use this all available information. So they siloed information by using it for marketing, but they didn't use it for AML compliance. And they also committed, I'll show you in just a second, what was actually one of the worst offenses. So what happened with these guys? They had multiple violations of the CTR rules, especially around aggregating when someone conducted more than one transaction on a given day. Their SAR filing history was atrocious. They had no SARs. This company opened up in 1950. The rules came into place in the 1970s for SAR filings by casinos. And between that point in the 70s until 2004, they had a total of 0 SARs filed at all. They had a small window in there in between 2004 and 2007, and then they went dark again for another 4 years. And then, and remember, this is the IRS exam happens, the compliance exam happens in 2010. So in the window there, right after that exam, they filed a total of 26 SARs. Great, right? Not so much. Most of them were incomplete, a lot of them were late, and a lot of them also had errors in it. And they also had similar errors on the record keeping, at least 245 violations within that 6-month exam period. So I love this because first off, I helped write it. And so if you read it in a soft whisper, it's almost like praying, right? So basically, so the examiners go in, and again, remember, they're allowed to interview anyone. They don't need a subpoena. They don't need to call you into the grand jury. They're allowed to examine. So during 2010, they asked the staff, look, weren't you guys looking for suspicious activity, or how were you looking? And so no matter what, don't ever do this. Don't say that we're not looking for that stuff because nothing suspicious ever happens at the casino. That's just leading with your chin, leading with your chin. And then some really just this guy at FinCEN, when he was researching this case, and he must have been brilliant because he actually found out that actually a few years before the exam, there was a public official, a county official, who was arrested for and convicted at least $2.5 million or $2.2 million and gambling that at the casino. And what happened? It was publicly reported, so the casino was aware of it, but they didn't file a SAR on that activity. And let's get a little bit worse. Another example, their general counsel embezzled about $3 million from the casino, a financial transaction, and they didn't file a SAR at that. So all of a sudden, that first line, where nothing suspicious happens in that casino, becomes incredibly questionable at that point. There was one other incident, it was publicly reported, where there was actually a gang-style, like point-blank shooting on the casino floor, where actually 2 rival gangs That wasn't a financial transaction, so it didn't actually trigger a SAR requirement, but it does call into question whether or not something, and nothing suspicious ever happened at the casino. So just don't set yourself up for failure that way. There's something else that happened in the consent order. So the marketing team and the leadership told their compliance officer, stop speaking with the exam team. Always, always. This is one where cover-up gets worse than crime, right? It's like, listen, if you tell the person who is in charge of BSA AML compliance not to speak with the government who is reviewing you for BSA AML compliance, immediate red flag. So. Then finally, when we're talking, remember before we were talking about the SAR filing failures? Well, this may be why. Because they said like, okay, so you're supposed to report to the SAR committee. As I said, okay, who's on the SAR committee? Well, A, B, C, and D. They went to some of those people and they didn't realize that there was a SAR committee. They never met. And some of the people who were supposed to be on that, on paper, living it on policy, again, this is where policy and culture divide. The people who were supposed to be on the SAR committee weren't even aware that there was a committee, much less that they were required attendees. So needless to say, this was a company that was going to have some problems, and then it did result in a fine. So that's the one. And I'm going to skip, just in the interest of time, just because I think Curtis has a much more interesting presentation than mine. I want to skip just towards the very end. I'm going to skip through. There are a couple. There are several others. You know, some takeaways here, especially that bottom one. Don't ever say nothing suspicious ever happens here. It's like saying what can possibly go wrong. But there are some other enforcement actions, including this one from Tinian Dynasty, that I will just quickly skip through before getting to the very last part. I love that slide. Love that slide. So FinCEN in 2014. And again, this goes back to something that Nick was alluding to about making sure that the regulations themselves are kind of brought to life and not just sitting on a page. If I misstated, my apologies. But and it's basically this. So FinCEN comes out with this advisory. It's not just directed to the casino industry, even though it does come in the wake or immediately prior to various casino enforcement actions. And they basically flag this. They say, listen, there's a lot of non-compliance in financial services institutions generally. And so that's resulted in a bunch of civil and criminal enforcement actions. So we want to highlight at least these 6 principles. And here are the principles. First, that there's got to be tone at the top. There has to be leadership that's engaged. If you just attempt to enforce this on the staff level, you're not going to get anywhere. The second is that there shouldn't be an instance where profit motive overrules compliance. In other words, if something is against the law, there shouldn't be someone from the business side of the house saying, can we afford to do this? Can we afford to do this? And this is often an instance where someone says, can we afford to ban this customer even though we suspect, you know, that he or she is a drug smuggler or is conducting money laundering? Third one is this, and this is the siloing point, that information should be shared throughout the organization. If a financial institution is using certain information for marketing, for credit, to protect themselves against fraud risk, they should also be reporting that and assessing that for purposes of illicit finance risk. They have a regulatory obligation to do that. And so information shouldn't be siloed throughout an organization. This has become very important recently in some enforcement actions where compliance officers have been given the responsibility, but not the authority to do things or not the resources to do certain things. So you see where a financial institution, this often happens in the bank space, where a bank grows dramatically or a casino grows dramatically, but their compliance program atrophies. So their marketing department may get triple the budget year over year, but the marketing department stays stagnant. And that has been a concern. It's been flagged in a number of different enforcement actions. There should be, you shouldn't be able to judge yourself. You should actually have some independent and competent party, even if it's from within the organization, they should be independent. And then finally, people should understand why people are doing the things that they're doing. I don't know what my weekly status is, but you guys are more important than they are. So key takeaways is basically this. Let me just wrap up on this, that AML is not just important in the gaming space. It's been important, I think, and it is relatively apolitical, unlike some other areas like environmental protection or consumer protection. Second is there is a lot of regulatory scrutiny, not just at the federal level, but also at the state level. Violations will cascade, they do interrelate. So if you do have a program violation in place, you are likely going to have problems on your reporting and record keeping. If your record keeping is deficient, you're probably not going to be able to do all your SAR filings or your CTR filings. This one is, of course, obvious. And then finally, the culture of compliance is a big deal. The culture of compliance advisory, or at least the concepts in the advisory, show up in virtually every enforcement action against the gaming industry by FinCEN. And it's also been brought up by other agencies, regulatory agencies, not just in relation to AML compliance, but in other things like in consumer protection. So I think that's pretty much it. This is something I've always given to my staff and sometimes to my clients in the hopes that they do this. I know I've wrapped through a whole bunch of stuff. We do have a gaming compliance conference specifically on this. It's a 4-day conference. We have a number of state regulators from across the country. You are more than welcome. We would love to have any or all of you join. It's also an opportunity for many of you to meet each other. I know through NAGRA, there's often that opportunity as well, but those who are specifically interested and involved in the illicit finance space, sanctions evasion and anti-money laundering, we have that every year. We also have people from Treasury, from law enforcement and the intelligence community. So we allow them to share views and often take the stage too. But I think with that, I think that's pretty much what I have. I'm happy to answer questions, but I also want to be mindful of time and my colleague who's coming up next.
Thank you, Gregory. Does anybody have any questions for him? Go ahead, Tom.
Regulators or policymakers for the state of Wyoming, what are things that we should be thinking about that are continuing to not invite nefarious people into the state?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, that's a great question. So thank you for that. I think that the biggest thing is to consider if you're thinking about a certain amount of like a new rule or something like that, it would be first just to identify the risk, like if it is cartel risk, if it is third-party money launderer risk, and then to try to create a rule or at least a set of principles around this. I do think education is really important because I do think that most casinos, most financial institutions, they're not trying to be complicit in this. Often they're just unaware. I mean, this casino that hosts the roulette wheel that has accomplice A and accomplice B, that's a horrible customer for them. They're not making money off of those customers. Someone who does minimal gaming, that's not a profitable patron. So the first thing I would suggest actually is education. And the second thing is, if you were to consider having, putting some rule in place, it would probably be around know your customer. Because I think anonymous gaming is at least from what the government is saying, is a real threat. Because it essentially allows, where there is an allowance of anonymous gaming, you're basically saying that the criminal can immediately decouple the source of funds from herself. I don't know if that answers the question or if it just is too.
Quick question for you. Do you have an idea roughly of the percentage of, let's see, how do I put it? The percentage of time that the gaming industry is used as the vehicle to launder money versus some other avenue?
Oh, no, it's a great question. Short answer is no, and I don't even think law enforcement knows. I do think that there are some areas, especially around trade-based money laundering, that is largely unregulated space because they're not financial institutions. You can over-invoice and under-invoice. No one's checking a lot of, travel at the docks. That said, I think the gaming industry, once the banking industry started getting much more directly regulated, and also, frankly, because they started paying their compliance officers more. But criminals are very innovative. They are. Criminals are some of the best beta testers. Right? I mean, they are excellent at technology. They're very resilient. They're experimental. And so if you're trying to structure money somewhere in by use of mules or small, you're not going to be able to do that in a bank. Most bank surveillance systems will catch you. At a casino, different story. So, but the short answer is, I don't think there are credible numbers on that, just because. But when I said that 1 trillion to 2 trillion, that's a big window. 1 trillion to 2 trillion is laundered annually. That's a dartboard. That's a dartboard.
Mr. President.
All right, Ed.
So you know the four main gaming industries we have here. We have, live horse racing, OTBs, sports wagering, and skills game. What do you think of those four are the most vulnerable right now for us?
I don't think there's a lot of attention on skill-based gaming, especially if there's peer-to-peer skill-based gaming, because that's a real easy vector. If you and I are wagering, if I'm your drug supplier and you need to pay me, all we have to do is get on a peer-to-peer game and I throw the game. And there's often no surveillance on that. And I can tell you, if there is peer-to-peer, if there's not, okay.
We don't have peer-to-peer.
That helps. On sports wagering, there is an opportunity if someone is doing a both sides bet. I think also anywhere where there's an insufficient attention to source of funds. The source of funds is a real area, but I'm not knowledgeable enough to know. I think a lot of that just depends on who the actual customers are, as opposed to, what sort of techniques you could do to ensure that there are some of those. I know that there was some concern in the previous module about internet gaming. Like, why, is that just something federal? There are federal statutes in place on that, like the Wire Act, like UGIA, the Unlawful Internet Gaming something Act. So there are federal rules in place, but I think the reality is, even wagering that occurs over the internet is often penalized. If it affects a given state, it can violate a state law. It can absolutely violate a state law in addition to the federal law. As a matter of fact, some of the statutes, including UGIA, depends on a violation of state law to be federally penalized, to be a federal penalty. So I do think that internet wagering, and then finally, I do think that, look, we'll see what happens with prediction markets. But if there's a form of wagering that exists that is prohibited in your state, and then all of a sudden there is a business model that allows it in your state, despite your efforts, that's a huge gaping hole. And that's something that I think affects every state. I think it affects every tribe. It affects the states that have blanket prohibited, or even the states that have blanket allowed wagering, because basically it allows a company to exempt themselves from the determination of the citizens and the regulators in that jurisdiction. I think that's a huge gaping hole.
Thanks.
Representative Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of the nation, what state has the best policies as far as addressing this? We don't want to reinvent the wheel here in Wyoming, but who's the best one out there?
You're going to get me in a lot of trouble real quick. So I'm going to say West Dakota. So to offend all of them. So I would
Louisiana.
In terms of the most robust, I would say New Jersey and Nevada, I think, have the most overall experience with it. I think that New Jersey has has some earlier experience just because of, look, there was organized crime in both. I'm a Sicilian that was raised in New Jersey, okay? So I know a little bit about organized crime, and I was an organized crime prosecutor. So when I was at the Department of Justice, they said I was the only Sicilian on that side of the V, right? And I do think the history of gaming there has informed their regulatory regime. I do think Nevada has a different approach to it, but I think they also, because for a while there because of a regulation that they had. They were effectively exempt from the federal rules. That's changed. But they were effectively saying, we'll take care of our own regulation. But I do think that there's a lot of experience there. And I think it has less to do with what's written on the page than how it's being, than how the policymakers there are looking at it and engaging with the industry. One of the things that I think has been very helpful in both of those jurisdictions is that there's been a lot of industry outreach to say, what are you guys seeing? And that doesn't mean we're going to necessarily agree with you. I'm always reluctant to say like public-private partnership, right? Because it's never really a partnership. Like you can take away their licenses, you can penalize their individuals, you can find them back to the Stone Age, but there is a commonality of interest. Because I think that most of the legitimate operators, and most of them are legitimate operators, they engage with New Jersey DGE, and Lou Rigacki is the deputy director there, and he's exceptional. He goes out and he deals with everyone in Atlantic City and all the online gaming operators. The new Chairman Dreitzer in Nevada Gaming Control Board, and Judge Assad and Member Sandal in Nevada Gaming Control Board, they're reaching out to industry, trying to see what would be a good way for them to craft a new regulation to address some of the issues that have been coming up in some of the enforcement actions. Because I think at the end of the day, it's in the government's interest to see compliance. It's also in the government's interest to make compliance actionable. Otherwise, all you're doing is saying, we won't tell you what to do, we'll just tell you when you get it wrong. So, I am always here at your disposal. I'm leaving my contact information. I'll also leave it with your colleagues. So, I really welcome, I miss my time being in government. And also I look at these as really opportunities to learn as much. So thank you very much for your questions.
Thank you.
But always don't hesitate to go.
President Cavello, as we're swapping spaces here, just wanted to remind you all, in the Spectrum Gaming study that we had completed, that was one of the shortcomings, was the fact that the state of Wyoming doesn't have any laws on AML or anti-money laundering. There was a bill that was brought in the Senate last year that failed. The Select Committee on Gaming put that back forth. Representative Lean actually is the sponsored name, since the Select Committee can't sponsor a bill. But that went to Management Council just a couple of days ago, and they voted to move that and sponsor that bill. So that'll be coming back
Very positive.
this year.
Very, very positive. We're going to continue to move on, but don't hesitate to use facilities as you need to. Go ahead.
Introduction.
Did you want to take a break, or did you want to just keep going? Okay. President Cavello. So the next speaker, Mr. Linnell from the TRPB, Thoroughbred Racing Protection Bureau, and I'll let him introduce himself and give some background and then take it from there.
First of all, Nick, thank you very much for putting me last. Appreciate that.
What do you say?
Thanks for putting me last.
You weren't last on the agenda.
That's been
There you go.
President, members of the commission, Vice President, Executive Director, distinguished guests, thank you very much for the invitation. We're going to talk about a really esoteric subject for the next few minutes, horse racing. I know we haven't touched on that, so we're going to get right into it. So I'm Curtis Linnell from the Thoroughbred Racing Protective Bureau, and we've been involved with Wyoming since the inception of HHR, so over 10 years. Wyoming has been a horse racing success story, and I mean that sincerely. We've seen Wyoming go from 0 race days to the slate of race days and the associations we now have, 54, the count last year. That is tremendous. We have seen Wyoming
lead the country in the increase of Wyoming bred horses versus any other percentage. Again, we started from a very small base, but that is success. And I congratulate the industry in Wyoming. That's one of the reasons for this is because fundamental integrity. Having integrity in the regulation of racing is fundamental to the success of horse racing in any and all of its aspects. So whatever the Wyoming Gaming Commission does, having that term of integrity has been in the past and continues on in the future. And again, I congratulate the industry. So I'm not going to cover 80 years of history of the TRPB, founded in 1946, embedded in thoroughbred racing to protect the integrity of thoroughbred racing. We've become the preeminent authority on parimutuel wagering. I took tons of notes from the last speakers, and they were very good. One of the things that Dr. Bowe mentioned was Singapore, which I found was interesting. Singapore has shut its racetrack down for a variety of reasons, but racing has moved to Malaysia, Singapore. Just last month, we assigned customer codes and event codes to an association in Malaysia. So that's the scope that we have for horse racing throughout the world. We're also a member of the International Betting Integrity Association. That's basically European based, and they have all the bookmakers across Europe. So when we talk about if an event, as we saw in the NBA, can be fixed in one state and then take place in another, that is also true internationally. Something can occur in one country and get bet and manipulated in another country and cashed out in the third country. So it's not just federal, it's international. And that's important to know. Okay, let me give you those 80 years very, very quickly. The TRPB started in 1946 with the problem of organized crime in the rackets and horse racing. And that was because of ringers in horses. Shady characters were putting in horses that weren't the horse that was supposed to be in a race throughout the late 1940s. We're fixing races, we're taking riders and having races manipulated. There was a lot of stuff going on in horse racing. And so with the thoroughbred track owners, the TRA, Thoroughbred Racing Associations, that said, we have to address this, or else racing will be shut down. Racing will be something that nobody will participate in with any legitimacy. So they created the TRPB. The TRPB licensed and patented lip tattoos. And so that started years of horse identification that existed until 2020. Very early on, the TRPB was modeled after the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover was a fan of horse racing, and some of the thoroughbred owners on the TRA went to him and said, we need an organization like the FBI for horse racing. And that's what the TRPB became. So fast forward to the turn of the century. Increasingly, racing commissions started to take the place of agents at racetracks, investigators and other people. So the focus of racetracks and the TRPB became more on betting than it did on actual agents at the track. And that continued through, and the watershed moment was the Breeders' Cup in 2002, in which the Breeders' Cup Pick 6 was fixed by some insiders, not the races itself, but the betting on it. And the Thoroughbred Racing Association decided very quickly that there needed to be a wagering integrity unit to take the place of governing all and doing integrity of all wagering. So the betting analysis and security platform was developed going back to horse identification. Technology had it in which we could actually use some modern techniques for horse identification rather than lip tattoos. and we made a transition program across all of Canada and the US to digital tattoos, and I'll touch on that. Okay, so 6 significant services of the TRPV. Horse identification through the digital tattoo, wagering analysis, embedding security on live event horse racing, advanced deposit wagering, auditing, and reporting, and that middle one that you see, historic horse racing, auditing, integrity testing, and reporting. Those 4, we are directly involved in Wyoming. The TRPB has services that we provide in Wyoming. The first one, digital tattoos, the clients are the horse people, the horsemen. All thoroughbred horses, before they make their first lifetime start in a race, have to be TRPB digital, have a TRPB digital tattoo. And so we have a really good feel on that. And we'll talk a bit about that. The background investigations and due diligence we've done on major offshore companies that have looked to do business in the country. So we've done due diligence on companies that are based in Gibraltar, Isle of Man, the Caribbean, the Philippines, Sri Lanka, the list goes on. Really places that gaming thrives and have international companies. We did a due diligence on the major bookmaker in Mexico. So lots of interesting stories on that. Okay, let's just very quickly go to thoroughbred horse ID. So all thoroughbreds, before they make the first lifetime start, have to have a digital tattoo. So we have technicians, and we have 3 of them that handle Wyoming. Interestingly enough, one's recent. Ann Provost, Wyoming Downs and Sweetwater. Scott Powell does Energy Downs. Because of all the activity that's been going on in Utah, and we've seen the training centers expand primarily for the Wyoming market in Utah, we actually just hired a technician to handle the Utah tracks. What the technician does is examines that horse, makes sure that horse is who it says it's supposed to be, looking at full photos, looking at markings, and then we upload 10 to 14 high-resolution photos immediately right to the horse's registry. So as part of the permanent record of that horse, there's these high-resolution photos that become part of the horse's passport. Those photos are used in race day identification and post-racing ID. So the numbers, always some interesting metrics. 40 thoroughbreds received digital tattoos in Wyoming, making their first lifetime start. 47 received digital tattoos in Utah, making their first lifetime start in Wyoming. So that's 87 horses. That's a 34% increase. Again, the numbers start small, but the increase and the rapid rate is impressive. A 34% increase in 2024, 53, percent increase over 2023. Now, the rest of the country, almost to every jurisdiction, is declining. So again, Wyoming is against the trend with the increase of thoroughbreds making their first lifetime start. Okay, advanced deposit wagering. There is licensed companies, 8 out-of-state ADWs that are licensed to operate in Wyoming, and they're licensed by the Wyoming Gaming Commission. These companies are domiciled in other states, hence out-of-state ADWs. So we go directly to those companies with reporting mechanisms that they have to submit to us daily. So we take information daily from ADWs operating with Wyoming residents, and we database that information. We scrub it, we make sure that there isn't inconsistencies, that there isn't aberrations, and we have integrity testing against that. So we report handle by operator, by pool, by event, by day, and by zip code. Zip code of the resident who has the account. So that's all governed under the Interstate Horse Racing Act. We've heard a lot of stuff from sports betting in which the wager is governed by where it's made. In the Interstate Horse Racing Act, the identifiable place of the wager is associated with the resident of the account holder. So that's how we report, and that is all very interesting. There is between 300,000 and spikes upwards of 700,000 in a month like May of account advanced deposit wagering by Wyoming residents. That is a significant amount of source market fees collected by the Wyoming Gaming Commission. Okay, on to the wagering integrity unit. So we examined the tote vendors in 2002 and took part, as I mentioned, the Breeders' Cup Pick Six incident. And the NTRA, the National Thoroughbred Racing Association, not the TRA, formed the Wagering Security Group. Little known remembrance of that, the outside security firm that the NTRA hired was Giuliani Partners. And so the first meeting we had with Giuliani Partners was on Wall Street in former mayor Rudolph Giuliani walked in and said, "We're going to solve this." There was 25 people around the table, gave us all a set of cufflinks. I still have them somewhere. And that was the last we ever saw of him. So nonetheless, it was an interesting process in which the TRPB decided to carry that on with the Wagering Integrity Unit in 2003. And I moved to Fair Hill, Maryland to start up that organization. So we built a betting analysis program. So we started with all client associations pools that we started to database. And the fundamental aspect of the TRPB over the years has been information. This led right into it. So we databased pool information, odds from every racetrack, probables, results, and put that all into a major database in which we started to do analysis. We expanded that later to the Wagering Analysis and Security Platform, in which we brought in echo-based data. Have all echo-based data, thoroughbred and quarter horse, and we keep that for a 5-year period. Again, database that daily. We launched racetrackmanager.org for user accounts. That was an external glimpse into access by authorized users into our database. And currently we have 45 racetrack clients plus 8 regulatory clients. Now, the biggest part of the wagering analysis and security platform, I just put this very cluttered mess of a diagram up on the screen, is we take all this information from wagering. Settlement files, odds, probables, charts, account wagering files, and we started to database all transactions. So we're now databasing over $14 billion of betting and canceling. Mentioned about anti-money laundering. We run daily a cancellation report because cancellations is one of the ways that people can take bad money and make it into good money at an organization. So we watch that. We run all this through our data warehouse and move it against algorithms. And we have a number of algorithms that identify aberrations in wagering, which triggers alerts. We also can trigger alerts from external, from a client like the Wyoming Gaming Commission. They get a public complaint or an association complains or a commission has cause, commissioner has cause to question something. They can initiate an action by the TRPB. We take that and we put that into either an ongoing evaluation in which we build a model of that activity and monitor that, or we directly launch a wagering investigation. This is, again, a bad slide of the screen. This is the betting on the 9th race, the win odds betting in Sweetwater Downs, September 27th. We database this in real time. This is from 10 minutes to post, right to the close of post. This is every horse in the race as a percentage of win betting. That's one of the things we look at is spikes and changes in win betting. And we database all that information along with results, with prices, and with the rest. We have an excellent wagering integrity unit that's led by Laura Hora, who spends
way more time than I do a week poring over all this and working with our analysts to triage this information. So let's go 4 years ago, going back to some history. So we had this wagering analysis and security platform co-location data at the Jockey Club in Lexington, and it was all on SQL. And we're now up to over, at that time, $12 billion transactions. We database those transactions on every race as soon as betting closes. So as soon as betting closes on a race, from all our client associations, from all our regulatory agencies, we database that information, all bets and cancels. So we now have billions of dollars that's being databased immediately. The benchmarks that we had were too low. Let's take the Kentucky Derby. And the last year we had this on sequels, 2022. Yes, 2022. When we started to close the Kentucky Derby, the largest race bet in North America, when we started to database all those transactions, it took us almost 6 hours to do that. It's a huge amount of transactions as we do point by point. So we've moved this entire platform at a very large investment expense and lots of work to Amazon Web Services. Amazon Web Services this past year, record bet on the Kentucky Derby, 232 million. We databased all the transactions in 91 seconds. So that was the performance measurement that we now have. We are able to query theoretically against bets made on the Kentucky Derby before the Kentucky Derby went official. So it's an extremely vibrant, robust platform that we have transactions. That's the platform that all betting in Wyoming is also through. So you're part of that. So let's go to HHR integrity. And historic horse racing has been, again, a tremendous success in Wyoming. And the reason for that success is, again, fundamental for integrity. So we'll put that right in the name, historic horse racing and integrity. So let's talk about what we do. And in our HHR auditing team is led by our manager of business analytics and development, Sharon Wright, who again puts all her creative energies into how well we can do certain processes of everything in the HHR world. Direct source data collection from code operators daily. So Wyoming, almost $2 billion in HHR, probably exceed that this year. That's a lot of activity. That 14 billion that I mentioned in transactions in the last slide did not include HHR, because of course we're the integrity auditor of not just Wyoming, but also Virginia for HHR. So we cover a lot of stuff. Daily customer reporting of handles, commissions, taxes. We do variance on any outliers. We also do on-site HHR auditing with race handicapping. This is open for anybody. How many OTBs in the state of Wyoming? 45. Very good. Thank you for that. You're the only one who could answer, I think. We've been to every one of them. Every one of them. It's enjoyable and interesting, a lot of driving and a lot of auditing. So review and reporting of non-compliance races. Historic horse racing. Every race that happens in historic horse racing is a race that occurred in the past under the auspices of a racing or gaming commission, under the auspices of a regulator that actually had stewards. The thing that's not being watched when it's been bet from a historical perspective is the betting that occurs when that is occurring on HHR in present time. So we become the virtual stewards of those events. HHR, and investigation of possible instances of fraud and unusual wagering patterns.
So there was a word that I didn't mention when I talked a lot about HHR. And that word is gaming or machines. That's actually two words. Fundamental to HHR is horse racing. And that gets overlooked all the time. Because you have operators that are involved in HHR that come from the gaming world. We have staff and executives that sometimes come from the gaming world. But HHR is its essence is horse racing. And it's horse racing that occurs in a parimutuel setting. And pools are derived parimutually in HHR. Those terminals, those big flashing lights and the reels and all that stuff is an entertainment display that actuates, that represents what has already occurred in terms of the bets and the results on HHR. And that's something that we really, when we talk to legislatures, when we talk to the general public, HHR is a horse racing activity. At its essence was designed, conceived, and operated as horse racing with entertainment provisions on top of it. Very successful, but that's what it is. Races, all races, and we test this in auditing, are accessible for manual handicapping. Is manual handicapping used? Not very often, because manual handicapping is slow. It's a cumbersome, lengthy process, especially when there's multiple races. There could be 10 races, there could be 9 races, there could be 3 races, but it's available. When one goes to FanDuel TVG or Twin Spires from an ADW platform, there is handicapping tools that people can use. For example, you have expert picks that give their pick 5 selections. By one click, you can bet that pick 5 from the expert selections. That is akin to the automatic handicapping tools on HHR. That can occur and does occur, and people use them, and they're very good. The entertainment display, though, is a reflection of what's going on in the race. We do a lot of comparisons between tow companies. One of the things on that first slide we did, and it was a painful process in live and simulcast horse racing, is we took all the tow companies and we put them in a room over and over again and said, these are the reports you're going to write to, and this is the terminology you're going to use in those reports, and these are how you're going to report it. And they all participated, and so we had, for live and simulcasting, commonality of terminology, vocabulary, and reporting. We do not have that in HHR. Each HHR tote, Exacta Systems, Ainsworth, Paramax, Castle Hill, have different terminology. So we had to map all that stuff that happened in HHR to what was common, what each tow company, HHR tote, called what. And we've done that. And this is an example of the many, many screens we have that compares HHR tow companies against each other. This is what happens with the race replay. And we've gone through a long process in doing this. Again, here's Paramax and Castle Hill. Chart information. This is everything we database for charts, for historic charts. So when we audit and pull a race for HHR, this is all the stuff we're looking at. This is all the stuff we're complying to make sure the results of every one of those races comport to what was used in that historic event that the customer played. So customer protection. So we go to great lengths in order to do those charts. So this is our last and latest development that we undertook. And again, our manager of business analytics spent a lot of time and lots of company investment putting this together. And it's as impressive as any database query engine
that is possible. So every day, we collect all HHR data from every one of the totes, from every location, 45, according to Nick, from 45 locations, and all the activity. And we grab that every day and we database it. And if you look at the right, and it's hard to see because we granulize that after it's scrubbed for race day, tote company, county, city, math ID, even terminal manufacturer. So all of that is in this database, day of the week and month and so on. And that's all available to the Wyoming Gaming Commission. And that's all available instantly as soon as that data is scrubbed and is online and is used as a formative source in both jurisdictions that we're the integrity auditors for. So it was an extremely productive development that we've used. Here's an example you won't see from, I don't think, anywhere else. This is the amount of handle by day of the week for November 1st through November 5th. This is actual Wyoming numbers. So hopefully everyone signed an NDA when they see this. By all the associations. And if you notice the terminology, wagered, payout, payout percentage, commission, takeout, breakage, opening, net, closing. Those are all parimutuel terms because it's all parimutuel. And that's important. So it's a great development. This is just an example of some of the reporting. We do a lot of reports. We do monthly integrity audits for every association, all 3 associations in Wyoming, for every HHR tote. And there's 4 HHR totes. And everyone has an independent integrity audit that's performed monthly. And we do that and provide that to the Wyoming Gaming Commission, plus any investigations for any aberrations that occur from that integrity audit. And I think that's it. That's all I have to say, but I'm open for questions, so thank you.
Just thank you for that information. Do we have any of the commissioners or anyone here who'd like to do a question or follow-up?
Yes, some explanation for me. Maybe my fellow commissioners know this, but I don't. You mentioned sort of in, I guess, in the area of money laundering or something negative, where you looked at bets and cancellations. Explain the cancellations part. Why does that bring up more concern?
Well, cancellations is much in our, name-wise, let me get this, Greg. Greg was so eloquent in explaining, I should have looked over here and then I'd see it. In between the Pelican slides. How you take bad money or dirty money and turn it into good money. And he used the examples of chips, for example. One of the things you can do is take bad money, buy vouchers. You can take bad money, put it into a parimutuel terminal, and then you make bets on that, because we have flags if you just take a voucher and take that voucher and try to cash it. That we flag. But if you then bet it, and now it's a transaction and you go to someplace else and you cancel that bet, and then you take the money back from that bet or get another voucher, you now have a discontinuous path from those two. And then you take that voucher and then you cash it for winnings or whatever you want to say it is. And now you've laundered money, if you're a bad person, for a zero cost. Zero. You could break that up to many people, beards, as they're called, badly before everybody had beards. And you can do that. So cancellations, and it's not just for that. We also look for cancellations for pool manipulation. So we trace cancellations quite frequently. We run that right from our AWS system for every race, for every day, for every track.
Thanks.
Anyone else?
Curtis, could you explain pool manipulation a little bit more?
I could spend hours explaining pool.
And just how that's used?
Pool manipulation is when there's a couple instances of pool manipulation. Let me take one that involves international sources, in which typically small amount bet pools are targeted, in which offshore or Caribbean and South American race books, are taking those events as a bookmaker. And then certain horses, long shots, are steamed, and favorites then pay an exorbitant amount to place a show. And typically to show. We've also had it on Quinellas and Daily Doubles, and haven't had an instance with Exacta. And then those individuals cash through a bookmaker that's disconnected to any of the pari-mutuels a large fee, because the bookmaker's paying on track prices. So that's one instance of pool manipulation, and we see that a lot with events that during the week that are minor bet. That's easy with a number of thousands of dollars to actually change the price on those. A second part of pool manipulation is fraudulent races, in which certain bets are made, horses are favored, and then suddenly those bets are canceled and are switched to different horses. Typically, horses bet heavily to win, and then we see cancels, and suddenly that horse, another horse is keyed, or horses keyed in the trifecta without that horse included. And so it's a key in order to look for fraudulent races. So that's another reason for bet manipulation.
Anyone else?
Your discussion of integrity of the HHR machines.
I didn't mention machines, but that's
Okay. Intrigued me. I mean, we have these machines, and what is it your bureau does to ensure that they actually replicate the historical race? And that it's
to make sure that the races that are selected by the game, by HHR, are the ones in which the results are supplied.
right?
Because there's nobody watching that.
Nobody.
That is a functionality of the game itself.
Yeah, you said something about being the stewards for, at least that's what I understood, the stewards.
Steward of that betting event. That's
Yeah.
correct.
So
when you go to bet on HHR, and
Right.
let's see, there's three races that are being served up. And are those three races the ones that you've looked at, that you've had an auto handicapper program pick for you, or you've manually selected yourself, or is it three other races? And so we audit HHR to make sure those races that are selected are actually the ones that are coming up and people are playing. That is also, when we look at integrity, that all HHR pools are carryover pools, much like pick sixes or jackpot or carryovers. And we look to make sure that those pools, the closing balance is the same as the opening balance the next day, to comport that math model. And again, there's many thousands of pools in HHR, so it's all done obviously by a database and all done by our program.
it's done on a daily basis?
When we audit, we do that twice a year, that we go to every OTB. Actually, the small OTB is every second year, but we take hundreds of races and test that against playing on the auditing. The database, the first instance where we collect the handles, commissions, breakage, and that, we're doing that on a daily basis because we can do that remotely and automatically.
Hey, thank you.
Anyone else?
President Cavello, just to go on upon that even more. So we hire them and they come in twice a year and do those audits independently. But when we have inspectors in the field there, they're also doing those daily to verify that the race results and the historical data is accurate.
Yeah, because when you play those machines, Yeah, I mean, there's no way to even tell that a horse race had been run. I mean, so I was curious about that. Thank you for your explanation.
Director Laramendi, I'd like to commend you on an excellent selection of educational subjects for us today. Certainly pertinent to what we're doing and increasing our level of education and whatnot. Does anyone have anything else before we move to the next subject? If not, I will accept a motion to retire to executive session.
I'll second that. Then go into executive session as per.
Wyoming statute 16-405A.
President Cavello, the commission will be going into executive session pursuant to Wyoming statute 16-405A IX.
IX, thank you. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Okay, are we gonna do that in this room? We're gonna move?
President Cole, let's go across the hall and then we'll make a couple of phone calls.
We'll make a couple phone calls to those of you that are online and need to be involved. We're gonna leave this room.
He's got a large bladder. Okay.
What'd you say? Yeah.
45 minutes. 45. This executive session is going to be at least